On First to the Best, we get to review the often overlooked or forgotten first film by some of cinema's best directors. We'll discuss how these legendary directors got their first opportunities to make their mark in cinema. These are the movies they cut their teeth and learned the filmmaking ropes of Hollywood. We'll take a look at how these filmmakers' careers evolved from here, as well as their signature style, cinematic trademarks, and thematic ideas that may have been prevalent right from their very first chance in the director's chair. So join Cinema Gulp in an appreciation for filmmakers that once you get a taste, we know you'll say,
Once it hits your lips, it's so good!
The first episode for this new show, we're gonna talk about my favorite filmmaker, James Cameron, and his first film, Piraña 2, The Spawning.
But first, we're going to talk about my favorite filmmaker, Katherine Bigelow, and her first movie, The Loveless. A lot of things about this movie to digest. It was filmed in 1980. When you look for it, it'll say The Loveless, in parentheses, 1981, but it is actually released in 1984 in a festival in 1982. So yeah, it's The Loveless, the early 1980s is what we'll call it. Katherine Bigelow co-directed this when she was 29 years old. And it shows it's a beginner project that's kind of written all over it. It's a learning experience. Co-directed it with possibly the best name ever, Monty Montgomery. Co-wrote it and directed it. She went to grad school in the film program at Columbia, where she studied theory and criticism and earned her master's degree there. She's a Cali native born in San Carlos. One of her first efforts in film was a short film called The Setup, which was like a 20-minute deconstruction of violence in film, which is really interesting. I haven't seen it, but that is very intriguing because of she's been such a big presence of violence in film.
Yeah.
She's glorified it. She has dissected it. She's villainized it. She's done everything with violence. So I'd really be interested in seeing this little 20-minute short docudrama thing that she did. Yeah, and after this film, you know, she really hit the fucking gas pedal and started meeting all the future collaborators. I really enjoyed watching this movie, even though I wasn't sure what I was watching. Because I was still seeing things in it. I was seeing shots in it where I'm like, oh, you know what? The near dark shot kind of looks like that.
Yeah.
A lot more about how her earlier career looked like than it does maybe in the 90s where she got really action oriented. The thing that I was most curious about in this movie, going into it after like doing just basic like IMDb research on it, was the fact that it was edited by someone named Nancy Cantor. And when you IMDb Nancy Cantor, she has an extraordinary career. Amazing. None of which are editing past this movie. This was the only movie she ever edited. First and only movie she ever edited. She became a huge producer in children's television, being one of the biggest names in The Muppet Show and Sesame Street and later like the Elmo stuff.
Okay.
So she probably made a fuckload of dough just in a totally different arena than editing film. So when I looked at her thing, I'm like, that is so bizarre that she became this really big, important person like Sesame Street and stuff. Because you think about how long Near Dark was after this movie.
Yes, there's a long stretch there.
Very long stretch. Like maybe she was writing.
Katherine Bigelow is not someone I know every detail about her trademark style throughout her career, but there were things that, like you said, you could definitely see shots that felt like Near Dark in some of the earlier work. I guess Blue Steel is the next film, and that one actually already starts veering into that same mold as Point Break a little bit, I would say.
It's not as actiony as the preview made it think.
Yeah.
It's not that actiony, but that is where.
But it's got the blue Cameron lighting and stuff like that.
And it is puking blue camera.
Yeah, I mean, it's Blue Steel. You gotta expect it. That opening shot, we both said how great that deep focus of that long ride up this road with this motorcycle.
The first 5 minutes is probably my favorite 5 minutes of the movie, which is just him on his motorcycle and then him sort of like quasi helping like that girl,
helping,
the woman,
molesting. I mean, it's the 80s, you know.
The shots and the fast pacing and like the song that was playing. It was kind of one of the only scenes that had like a payoff.
Yeah.
Where it's like by the end of like he's changing her tire, but he's acting like a slime ball. So we're like, oh, is he just like that weird biker with a heart of gold? And then you're like, oh no, he's not. He's a piece of shit.
This biker gang rolls into town. One of them needs to get their bike fixed, so they kind of spend a day fixing the bike. And the rest of them are hanging out either in the diner or they end up at a bar late at night or cruising around town with this young girl that's kind of available to William Dafoe, and he goes on a little ride with her.
This was Bigelow's first movie, but this was not her first studio movie. That was Near Dark. Near Dark was where she ended up meeting lots of collaborators that she would work on for a long time. Obviously, James Cameron is a big name, but I think her most important collaborator that she met in Near Dark was Howard Smith, who also happens to be my favorite editor. I have 2 or 3 favorite editors, and sometimes they're interchangeable. But he does some amazing work, and he did some amazing work for her in Near Dark. He did not edit this film, which is why the editing feels so jarring in certain moments, because he probably could have taken this movie and done something extraordinary with what he had through editing. Like, I love that movie, The Limey. Why is it good? Because the editing is so cool. There's nothing happening.
Is he the editor of that movie?
He's not, but it's the idea of like, just take some simple thing and like, can you make it beautiful, and can you push a story out of nothing?
Yeah.
And obviously this person probably is great at handling Big Bird and all that shit, but like she probably maybe just didn't know how to do that stuff. But and I don't know what happened between Howard Smith and Bigelow. There's things in this movie that like feel like her more so in Near Dark, you know?
Yeah.
Probably because so much of it is just one kind of like simple closed-in location of like a country, a town out in the country or whatever. I don't really know where it was supposed to be. It seemed like it was supposed to be between maybe New York and Florida somewhere. Yeah. All the exterior shots are really cool. Good use of like daytime lighting and natural lighting, and I don't know, the stuff that takes place in the diner that went on for so long, like what is fucking happening? And I just think the script was the problem. I think there's decent filmmaking on display, probably done by her.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, but
some really cool shot selection.
Actors yet?
Yeah,
because she's really good at handling actors in her career at this stage.
Mm-hmm.
The music, the level of the music becomes this strange thing where it's just not cutting with the scene, and when people leave the diner, they cut to other music immediately, and it sometimes is jarring, and so it's like a love or hate with the music in this movie, but by the end it kind of played itself out. It was more, like you said, the first few minutes of this movie are the most interesting, and everything that we're kind of liking at the beginning starts to play itself out as the movie goes along.
Because you think it's starting out that way, but it'll eventually kick into gear. Kind of like Blue Velvet. Like, it took its time, it was quiet, it was slow, everybody was eerie and kind of like just kind of going through the motions, but then it like picks up, you know, and like things start happening. This one, it just kind of stays in that first gear from the beginning to it almost devolves from that first scene. But it has that like feel, that surrealness of like the characters don't seem real and the camera doesn't quite know how to frame them at times, and that makes them kind of odd. It does that a little bit, but again, aside from like the dad who goes nuts and wants to kill people, no one feels like a over-the-top character aside from him, you know? Obviously, if you remove the bikers, then you don't have anything going on. But if you remove them from the situation, not the movie, but the situation, then they really don't do anything. Because if the story just really revolves around someone who comes into it halfway throughout, which is the young girl, and then she basically says, like, my dad, like, molests me and I'm like the town whore or whatever, and he catches her with a dude and then she shoots him later because she's fed up with his shit. That could have happened without any of the bikers there, because nothing really triggers him. But again, it was a competently made movie as far as like shot selection.
Yeah.
And it's not like a big mess. It's just kind of aimless, I guess, you know. But maybe the aim was to make a movie, get it made, and then go, okay, I can do this. Now let's make a real movie.
I feel like that's what a lot of these first efforts are, is just to prove to themselves, to learn the ropes, and prove to themselves, I know what I'm doing behind the camera, and what I shoot will cut together.
You know, a lot of people think that the first movie a director did is the first one they've heard of, or the first big one. These ones, you have to dig for these. I've got such a great respect for Katherine Bigelow. She lets her fucking talent and her skill set and her creativity and her drive to make movies, she doesn't need to go and ask somebody to direct a movie. She's like the fucking Christopher Nolan of female directors. She makes what she wants to make. Kind of just always snuck and grown up in all these movies and become this
action director where people didn't even know that she directed Point Break, but they just were like, "Wow, this movie's crazy," and it's like she fucking directed that movie. It's like, and it was always under the radar. It was never like hold up her hand. Oh, a woman directed this. It didn't. It didn't matter. It was just a filmmaker at the helm making fun movies. So I always respected her for that and admired her because she's very meticulous. She's very like detail oriented. Like everything she does, even tackling action, like getting that small taste for it in some of the car chases and stuff like that in like Near Dark. Do you remember when like Point Break came out? You know, there's no internet or anything, but it was always on the news because like, oh my God, they did these like real parachuting stunts and like the crazy stunts, you know, and it's like that stuff was crazy. Like people were jumping out of those planes without parachutes on. And I think her films are brilliant, but I love the way she's gone about her career. And, you know, she does Blue Steel and she does, you can almost call the, you know, Point Break like a companion piece. Not that they're anything alike, but they have that slickness to them.
Yeah.
You know, they have that slick drive to them. And then when you get to my favorite film of hers, specifically, I mean, and arguably my favorite film, Strange Days, that's when she's like gelling it up and just using so much primary color. It's never distracting. It's fucking pops in every direction. That's her, to me, will always be her most ambitious movie. Like even if people go, oh, well, you know, Detroit was pretty crazy, or and I love Zero Dark 30. It was my favorite movie that year, 2012. But you can't say Strange Days is not her most ambitious movie. It's so unique. It's so, and it to me, that movie has every trademark that she has.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
It has the camera work. It has the like, let's go crazy gobo, let's go nutty lighting, let's get the talent, because at that point she was so good with talent, with talking to actors on screen. And then she had done several movies with Smith, who knew how she wanted that movie to work, how the action scenes have to feel slick like Point Break, but then it has to be melodic when there's transitions. And that's the coolest thing about Strange Days is like it goes through these long periods of like, not montage, but just like showcasing what's going on in this fictional 99 in 95. And yeah, and just creating this whole world with all the fucking expressive colors and slightly over the top acting. Like that's the one where she just nailed everything about her. And then after that, I think she did K-19 The Widowmaker. I should just call it Harrison Ford's Russian accent.
Russian accent movie.
But I think that's when what you said, when after that is when she jumped into this different evolution. Zero Dark 30 is one of those movies kind of like I was talking about the Limey. You have to take a subject matter and through the editing you got to make the story flow, because that's like a 10-year period of time, that movie, like looking for Bin Laden.
Yeah.
And that could be very boring if you're focusing on like a single CIA agent who's just like pushing papers and that movie is just constantly nail-biting to me. Strange Days is the one that kind of turned things around for me and definitely made me want to like at least find out more about editing. You don't really know you want to be an editor from looking at a movie. It's not until you sit down and edit something for fun and then you go, oh, wow, I can construct that and make that work. She doesn't need people to go, hey, go over here and look at what this woman filmmaker's doing. She lets her movies speak for themselves. That's what I love about you, Mrs. Bigelow. So that was Katherine Bigelow. That was The Loveless, otherwise known as Breakdown, as it was originally written in the script, and in Sweden known as Black Leather.
Interesting, because my film that we're going to talk about in Sweden was known as Pariah 2, De Flagrande Mordana.
That's much different.
Or in Denmark, Vampire Fisking. All right, so let's talk about Piranha 2, The Spawning, This Time They Fly, James Cameron's directorial debut. This is a film that he was fired from, only shot 4 or 5 days on it. So technically there's another guy behind the camera for most of this film. He doesn't get the credit, but you do have to call it a co-directed film to some degree.
Sure.
There was an Italian producer named Ovido, fuck his first name, I don't even know how to say this. His last name is Assonitis, which sounds kind of painful. Sounds like something you should have a doctor look
Absolutely.
at. He had a deal with Warner Brothers to make Piranha 2 for $500,000. He wanted to skim some money and only make it for $300,000. But the deal was that he was contractually obligated to have an American's name on the film. So that's how not really how James Cameron got the job. Some other dude who worked with Joe Dante on the first Piraña was given the job. The studio didn't really like his ideas for the film, so they fired him pretty quickly. They bumped up James Cameron, who had been hired to do the special effects on the film. So he had already done some second unit directing with Roger Corman on some films, and so basically he was kind of, through Roger Corman, he was the next guy basically that they were willing to give this opportunity. But this Asonitis guy really just wanted to hire a director who was a first-timer that he could easily push aside and direct the film himself, which he had already done a couple times before. It was kind of something everybody knew about this guy. So basically when Cameron shows up for the job in Jamaica, he finds out that none of the sets are done, there's no locations secured, basically nothing's really ready to film, so he has to spend like his first week in Jamaica driving around, securing locations and finishing sets, building props, building rubber flying fish and shit like that. So eventually they finally start shooting.
Sure were rubber.
They eventually start shooting. He only gets 4 days into the gig before the producer fires him, telling him that his footage doesn't cut together. I guess there's a couple stories about him basically dropping a camera in the ocean while filming a helicopter scene. That would get anybody fired, so I understand kind of why he may have gotten fired. He also missed some close-ups apparently, and this producer guy had to go reshoot a whole day's worth of footage. That's kind of the story of Cameron getting an opportunity to work on this movie. So basically Cameron's fired, he goes home, he's trying to even figure out if he can sue this producer over all this that happened, but he's got no money. I guess he's able to come back to Italy to check on something. I don't know, he's in Italy for some reason, and he knows the code to get into the edit suite. So he sneaks into the edit suite for like a week each night, re-edits the movie into a version that he prefers, which I guess is maybe available to see online. Supposedly he cuts out all the nudity, which is a shame because that was a couple of the scenes we enjoyed in this movie. So if he cut that, yeah, what a fool. I guess the producer Asonitis found out, recut the film back the way he wanted, presented it to Warner. Warner Brothers didn't like it and shelved the movie, and it took another 2 years before it finally hit cinemas, distributed by some porno company. The stress of this job and losing the job and stuff, apparently while he was in Italy doing this edit job on the movie, he was having a fever dream in his hotel, and he dreamt of the robot coming out of the fire that was the inspiration for Terminator, that he really stole from some guy in an Outer Limits episode. But anyway, I definitely think it, you know, has a lot of the trademarks of a Cameron film, even though he wasn't behind the camera. It does say that he wrote the screenplay with this producer, and even to some degree the original guy who was hired has some credit on that. So I don't know what ideas stick from what he put on paper, but it's got a very strong female lead, totally a Cameron-esque female lead, filled with blue lighting. The typical Cameron blue lighting is, I mean, it takes place under the water a lot, so you're just naturally going to get that.
Right from the beginning of this movie, you're underwater, it's blue lighting, and there's a fucking ship at the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah.
If it's not, what's more Cameron than that? I thought it was cool. I thought it was really fun. It doesn't take itself as seriously as the first one. Piraña 2 was goofy fun, and it is just different enough from the first one.
B-movie fun, they give you just enough dialogue, exposition to tell you why we have flying piranha now and how it may be connected to whatever storyline there was in the first film. But really the films aren't really that connected, just other than that you got more piranha carnage.
They're as connected as Predator 1 and 2 are, where there's a quick line of dialogue, 10 years ago, such and such happened and it was covered up.
But as you pointed out, like in Predator 2, Predator 2 somewhat quickly reveals the Predator and stops worrying about the mystery of what is the Predator. This film keeps the mystery of who's killing people going on a little longer than we need to for a sequel where we already know that it's the killer flying fish.
It's what sequels do, that when they remove themselves from the original movie and they start the mystery over again, it's insulting your viewer's intelligence, because the poster has flying piranhas. We know the movie's called Piraña 2. The opening scene showed a piranha eating some people. So why, as the viewer, do we have to follow the people on the mystery as they're figuring this out without ever getting to see the piranhas again? We already know what they're looking for. So 40 minutes of their investigation is quite boring to a viewer because we already know what they're looking for.
Drawing out the mystery, fill screen time. That's what the producer's thinking.
Yeah, and it's also an easy way to not
spend a lot of money because you just have people talking in rooms.
Uh-huh.
Standard Godzilla syndrome.
Exactly.
You know?
Keep us on land. Oh, the other thing that's a total connection to James Cameron films is Lance Henriksen is the
Chief Brody.
Chief Brody character in this film, ex-husband of our lead female character. The biggest thing besides Lance Henriksen being in the movie and kind of the look of the film at times is just that very strong female lead. It really is. And again, maybe Cameron didn't even write that character, but I kind of think he probably had a big hand in her turning out as believable and strong on screen as she really is.
Yeah. A strong woman who at the end of the movie, to save everyone, goes into the hive and blows it up. Where's that
Where
stuff?
did that idea come from?
The man, the husband guy, isn't the hero. He's
Yeah.
the guy just going, get out of the water, while she's in there.
Another thing that he did on this film that's classic Cameron, he went over budget, according to the producer. Now, I don't know how his 4 days was but maybe dropping a camera in the ocean is enough to push the thing over budget. $389,000 off of $145,000 supposedly was spent on the actual film. But before he had this opportunity, he never went to film school. He basically just loved film like a lot of us and said, hey, I want to get involved with that. And after watching certain films, like he had always loved 2001, but apparently Star Wars and Halloween were two movies that made him say, I can do this. I want to get in the film industry. And he went and started working on special effects, working with Roger Corman. And, a couple years from late 70s, he was in the director's chair.
You said Roger Corman earlier, and I forgot that about him. Because sometimes you see filmmakers that become your favorite and you forget they worked with somebody else that was somebody really interesting in the business. This movie, Piranha 2, has kind of a Roger Corman feel to it as well. It doesn't hide the stupidity, and that's the charm of it, and that's a Corman movie.
Aliens is my favorite film ever. So, 2 films into his filmography, I was so hooked on this guy. Again, like you said, when you saw Point Break, you didn't necessarily know who the director was. I didn't necessarily know who James Cameron was. I may not even known that the same person who did Terminator did Aliens at that point in time, but by the time '89 Abyss had come out, I was familiar enough with those 2 films that I loved, that they were the same director, that this guy was magical, that he was amazing, and I was so ready for The Abyss to come out. I even remember reading some articles in whatever magazine. My 4 favorite films, the reason why James Cameron is the one I'm starting with, because there's a lot of filmmakers that I really respect and love their entire filmographies. And I could almost say that certain filmmakers at this point, because Cameron's dropped off to some degree, maybe should be considered my favorite filmmaker beyond Cameron. But when I sit down and talk about my favorite films, if I was to list the top 10, the first 4 are James Cameron movies. I can't get to another filmmaker before I get through Aliens, Terminator, Terminator 2, and The Abyss. Those 4 movies are perfection to me. So I just can't even move on to another filmmaker before I get to those 4 movies. And it's like 4 movies back to back that this guy made in this period of time that he kept every movie innovating and pushing the medium of film forward with each movie that he made. Now, beyond that, you get to True Lies. Fun, awesome movie. I love that movie. Titanic is a stone cold classic. Avatar is all right. Every film that he's ever made for me is a experience. You live it. You are in that world that he creates. Even if it's True Lies to some degree, you kind of feel the movie come to life right in front of you. Applying real science to movies, like making them come to life in a real way because he's applying the real world to his film. People always credit Cameron as being, one of the best action directors. But then I don't think they get why his action scenes are better than other action scenes. What it is about Cameron's action that makes it exciting is it's constantly building. The action scene keeps evolving. It's not just, someone needs to fight somebody and that fight scene's gonna end and we're just gonna go talk over here about something else. The situation keeps moving into the next phase. It's an ever building. When you think of like the end of Terminator 2, how it goes from Cyberdyne to the chase in the streets to the steel factory,
to the mall, to the fight, to the parking lot.
It's not a one location action scene, and it actually makes sense why it moves and why it progresses and why cause and effect has a play on how the action scene plays out.
The reason they feel intimate in those action moments is because they're always checking in with the characters involved.
It's emotionally driven.
Whether it's through a line of dialogue or a facial expression or just a cutaway of what they're doing, you're always knowing exactly what John Connor is thinking when he's getting chased by that semi, and it puts you right in those shoes, as opposed to just being a spectacle stunt.
Yes.
You know, and when you're watching it, I was 13 or something when that came out. I felt like just you're terrified for that scene. You know, because of those little things, and those are editing decisions too. But you have to shoot those scenes too.
Whether it's a romantic subplot or a child maybe involved in the film, but those connections always make it very emotional for whoever, you know, your hero is trying to save someone they love's life, usually to some degree in these movies, and it just makes, every movie has that maybe, but in these it works in an emotional way where it really grounds it in an emotional way where you're totally invested in these characters and you've got to see them succeed.
Both of our movies are not the movie where they were kind of set free to make. I'm not saying they didn't love the movies that they made. I don't think Cameron had a great time.
No.
But he probably learned a lot. He probably talked shit on it because that's the kind of guy he is. Bigelow, there's not much on her talking about Loveless. There's just not. She's not as big of a director, you know, in the zeitgeist as Cameron is, so it's harder to find stuff. But I do feel it was their second movies that really turned. You know, I said that about Wes Anderson too. His third movie, Royal Tenenbaums. That's the movie. That's the Wes Anderson creation right there.
Yeah.
And like with Terminator, that the character, the writing, it was the movie that would structure all his stuff from there forward. Not just the strong female character from the arc, because she's not strong at the beginning. Another one that you have to stick through. She's the damsel in distress. She's not actually. But then you have Michael Biehn's character who does everything that he does for her too, in this real gritty, you know, self-sacrificing way. So that to me, how do you not root for those characters in a movie? You know, and like, so yeah, I think that was the template moving forward with Cameron, because all Cameron's movies, I love the characters, the main characters.
Yeah.
All of them. Even fucking Jack and Rose, who some people hate, I love them.
I think his characters are all archetypes, you know, they're simple characterizations, sometimes, you know, caricatures of real people you might think. But in the context of the film and the story he's telling, which he creates a very believable world because of how his filmmaking style is, then these characters come to life within that. They become believable within the world you're seeing on screen. Maybe it's not the real world, but it's got enough realism applied to it that even if these are archetype characters or feel a little bit caricatured, like a Hudson or whatever, they still become grounded within the context of the tension, typically. Like, they're brought back to the real world because of the situation.
Yeah.
These first films that they got to make that, you know, it wasn't, they still didn't have complete control. They were still working on small budgets, working under studio control to some degree, had to put out, Terminator had to be a horror movie to be able to sell to some degree. A lot of the crew that he worked with on Aliens had worked on Top Secret and like Bond movies. But that's another area.
You mean when he went to shoot at what's it called, studios?
Pinewood
Studios, yeah.
And
they hated him.
Yeah, and apparently that was the first film where he was working in a bigger studio arena, but now he was being told to work with all these British crew that didn't like him.
Oh, and he was like, "What? Where the fuck are you going?" They're like, "It's tea time now."
Yeah.
He's like, "Get the fuck back here."
From the moment that Bud and the scraggly dude in his underwear swim out, they both have to swim out and hold their breath to go.
Or something?
Yeah, I forget the name on him, but they have to swim out and try and make it over to the moon pool or whatever.
Yeah.
From the moment they gear up to do that to the moment they revive her is my favorite section of any film ever.
Yeah,
Aliens is my favorite movie, but that section, I think it's maybe almost like 25, 30 minutes of filmmaking.
Yeah, it's
is maybe my most intense favorite section of film ever created. One last little bit of trivia for James Cameron that everyone out there doesn't know. In 1998, Guillermo del Toro's father was kidnapped in Mexico, and James Cameron gave him over $1 million in cash to get his father back. James Cameron saves the world.
Just ask everyone that's ever worked with him.
They all love him. We decided to do one of the best horror directors out there, John Carpenter.
And what's his first movie, John?
His first movie, Dark Star.
Now, is it his first movie? I think we have to assume it is.
It's his first film. It's a student film, but it's his first. It's not feature length in the way that we think of it. I guess it's 68 minutes. There is a longer cut to this movie.
Don't watch the longer one.
Don't watch the shorter one. I don't know.
It just stopped. It just stopped. Great. When you hear talk about John Carpenter or anything surrounding John Carpenter's life or career, you hear about Dark Star and you hear about some of the stuff that went on during the making of it. A little bit of a falling out he had with Dan O'Bannon, the guy he pretty much made this with. They were USC film students, and they got the itch to make this sci-fi thing, and I think O'Bannon used his sense of comedy to kind of turn it into a comedy where Carpenter wanted to kind of showcase. I think Carpenter ends up looking better than O'Bannon by the end of this.
Definitely.
Because
he's not on camera, for one.
Well, that's one thing, but it does showcase some good filmmaking techniques. And John, it's kind of a hard movie to critique because is it ever taking itself seriously? It's hard to tell if you're laughing at something or with it because they kind of flip-flop on the goofiness and the humor. I'm just assuming it's all a big slapstick comedy in space.
Get back in there. Come on.
I mean, it's got a fucking beach ball as an alien, and they don't even try to cover the creases of the blown-up beach ball.
No.
I'm disappointed in it because I wanted to have more fun for the obvious reasons. For it's a piece of shit, it's stupid, it's goofy. Problem is it's competently shot, and like there's some really inventive, creative techniques going on in it.
This just, this really feels like a student film, but a really good effort by, if you're saying that this is a no-budget kind of production by a bunch of people who have never been able to do work on this kind of level before, put together. Again, it's not feature length, but there's enough shot and enough put into this. But man, is it a movie? Because it has no plot. I guess my thing with this movie, knowing about it, and the reason why I've always been interested in seeing it was because I'm a huge Alien fan. So I always knew that there's some inspiration in this film for the film Alien. So I've always been interested to see, well, what was that? And Dan O'Bannon is the writer of Alien. He wrote and stars and edits this film and does none of those things well. You do see some of the threads and kind of little moments in this film that make their way into Alien. There is some of that. Creature design, definitely not one of them. The beach ball, that was another reason, I guess, that I had always heard about, you gotta see Dark Star for how silly this beach ball as a monster comes across. And it was poorly done, and you said that, you see the creases and there's just these little spray paint patches on it. It looks as bad as it could. It's not in the movie all that much.
It's the best character in the movie.
I thought it was going to be the movie, though, that this movie was essentially Alien with a really bad, poorly done creature. It's kind of just this one segment that really goes on for way, 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 way. It's a first effort, so who knows what they were putting their focus on. They obviously didn't put their focus on making sure that we can distinguish the characters, which would have been easy. Just ask someone to not have a beard. Ask someone to not have quite the same fuzzy hairdo. It was really hard. There's only 4 characters, and it was hard to tell who you were watching from scene to scene. Once we settled in knowing, okay, it's not going to be like Alien, and it doesn't take itself serious. It really is apparently a comedy, which like John Carpenter, you don't think of comedy for John Carpenter's films really at all. The jokes, if you can call them that, fall super flat.
Fuck yeah.
But then at the end, there's just such ridiculous stuff going on to wrap this movie up that we did chuckle a couple times.
Yeah.
So it did find a way to make us laugh. And not always just because of how bad it was or how poorly done something like the beach ball is. I was laughing at, I don't expect in a student film of this caliber to have well done effects, even for 1974, to the level of effects to even be something worth giving a crap about. But there was moments that looked like I was watching Sesame Street.
When you're talking about the end where it just fucking flat out goes off the rails, the way like our two survive, so the ship, the Dark Star blows up and there's one guy left who's just floating around, and another guy is floating really fast, and all of a sudden one guy sees this like phoenix coming towards him. He's like, oh, this is like a comet, I'm gonna join it and blend in with the ether, and then he just, I'm blue, and then he just disappears. And then the other guy just surfboards a piece of the Dark Star into a planet and blows up. To me, that's like kids,
that part was awesome.
To me, that's like kids going, fuck it, we don't know what to do.
Yeah. As you pointed out, the surfing into the planet was set up. That was foreshadowed in the film.
I used to surf a lot, Talby. I used to be a great surfer.
That ending was actually great. I enjoyed that.
Everybody dies. Spoilers.
Well, you know what? That's what I noticed with watching a lot of Carpenter's films for this little series we were doing. All of his films end with everybody dying, or the evil finding a way to still survive, not necessarily always winning, out and out winning the challenge of the film or whatever. I mean, Michael Myers isn't the winner, but he survives. And it happens in so many of his movies, definitely most of his best movies. Big Trouble, the monster's still on the back of the truck at the end. You know, just little moments like that. Kind of those little Carrie moment where the hand comes back out. Carrie's not his film, but
Big Trouble
that kind of thing. Just that little wrap up of like, oh, the evil is still alive. And it's almost every single one of his movies. This guy is like a nihilist, I think.
There's no way to name a happy ending of a Carpenter movie. Big Trouble in Little China is the closest to it because they defeat the bad guy. It wraps up. You get the guy back with the girl. But then there's that one thing at the end, which you can take or leave what that means.
Of like the monster's still there. I don't know. Let's talk about the first time we got to hear a John Carpenter score. This was the first time he put his music to a movie, and you know it still worked. John Carpenter never misses when it comes to.
It was the best thing about the movie.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
I loved the music in this movie. Did it fit in a lot of the scenes? Not so much when they were trying to go for comedy stuff. Where it really hit its stride was when you get introduced to the beach ball aliens and they're trying to give off a creepiness. That's when you and I first were like, oh, there's the John Carpenter score. Now it's coming. And the whole trek you get with him going through the corridors looking for the beach ball for reasons. And that's when the Carpenter score really builds up. Now, when they try to mix it with some of the humor stuff, you're like, it doesn't really make sense because he didn't change his tone or pitch of music. It never got goofy, the music.
Yeah, and it worked way better than that elevator music that they're playing.
Yeah,
that extended
cut.
A bit of an inspiration for something in Alien, potentially. There's a captain of this ship that had died, I think, from sitting in a seat that had some faulty wiring and got electrocuted. I think that's what I heard happened.
Yep.
And they put him on ice. We find this out later in the movie that he's been frozen, and they still have some kind of connections to his brain so they can talk to him and communicate to him. And I felt it seemed very much like the scene with Ash after his head's been knocked off in Alien, and they have to try to rewire him and ask him questions to find out what the hell's going on. It was very similar to that kind of scene. They have this problem in Dark Star. I guess they are bombers who go through the galaxy and clear the galaxy of planets that are unstable, that potentially might blow up or something.
Yep.
So they have these bombs that they have to talk to like they're people before they drop them. They ask them, how long do you have before you're going to blow up? And then in the time they're waiting before they blow up, they just have normal conversations with these bombs. It's the weirdest thing. And
it's some of the funniest shit.
What concrete evidence do you have that you exist?
Well, I think, therefore I am.
The attempt of this movie, I thought, was more of saying, let's make 2001 a comedy. Obviously Alien didn't exist, so it wasn't an attempt to make anything with Alien. That comes later. But this did feel like maybe, hey, we've seen that 2001, we were blown away. What could we do similar, but let's make it a comedy. So that's kind of what I got. And in the end, you do have this kind of AI, this bomb that's thinking for itself, that's saying, I need to blow up because my detonation time is coming. You've only got minutes. I'm going to blow up even though I'm stuck to the ship. There's the ball screwed something up. Yeah, it's a comedy of errors. I guess the ball did get involved where it screwed something up and made this bomb not want to detach from the ship. So one of the guys has to go out and have this whole conversation with it and get philosophical with it and give it a question to ponder so it'll spend time pondering that question rather than continuing to detonate. So that was your Dark Star. Not very entertaining, but I'm glad we got a chance to check it out and see the roots for John Carpenter's career. Let's talk more about that, because that's the good stuff.
That's the thing. Like, the roots are there, and that the opening reveal shot, the sort of truck back where you first see your three characters. That's an interesting shot because everyone's arm is extending as their bodies are coming into frame. I thought that was a really well framed shot, really cool shot. If we want to pivot to what I think is his first grand movie with a theatrical release, something he wrote, directed, edited, and scored, which is Assault on Precinct 13, one of my favorite movies of his, a movie I saw a long time ago. I own it. Moments in that movie that people study because it's an exercise in beats to frames, like the way he edits music and sound to how he conducts his shots. Because this is like a Rio Bravo take, basically.
He's a Howard Hawks fan.
Yeah.
And he wanted to make his own version.
And in the movie, you know, it became a little controversial with the shooting of the girl at the beginning of it, but it's such
It does feel that way. That's a shocking moment.
It is very shocking, and it comes out of nowhere. This movie has such a great way of building tension, and thank God he edited this one, because I think that's what was missing from Dark Stars. He didn't do the editing for it, because the strength of this one is in the editing, and just the cool story of it. Like, there's no escaping this. There's nowhere to go. And the scene I was talking about is that Rio Bravo scene where people start coming in through the windows. And if you rewatch that scene, it's like cut, boom, shotgun, boom, like window break, boom, like, and it's just edit after edit. It's such a fun, cool fucking scene to watch from an editing and action and visual standpoint. I kind of love that movie. I think it's a great first, like, real big movie.
Yeah, I love that movie too. I think it took me a while to get around to finally see that one. You know, everyone some people think Halloween is his first movie.
Yeah.
But Assault on Precinct 13 is a full-fledged movie. It's still kind of an independent production, but it's got enough of a budget and some, you know, performances by real actors, which you don't get in this Dark Star. Just getting that elevated production value and performances steps that movie up a ton. I've seen Assault on Precinct 13 2 or 3 times now, and it gets better every time. The score is great. It's really one of his best. Like his early work, I like all of his scores, but his first like 3 or 4, like all those earlier films, were excellent.
He has more iconic scores, but hands down, this is my favorite score of John Carpenter's. It's not even close. This movie has a long, close to 2-minute long credit sequence just of black. You know, he used to do that. A lot of people did back in the day. Just names popping up in dark background text, and like you hear the entire length of the theme song of this movie, and it just immediately raises the stakes before you even see a frame of footage. And you know, I love the Thing score too, but there's so much of that mixed with Marconi that you don't really know what's his. And obviously people love Halloween. Underrated one is definitely Escape from New York. That's a really cool theme song.
Christine's another one that I really like. It's got like when the headlights come on, it's all
He has everything, guys. Like, he can do everything to make a movie.
His run in the 80s is pretty damn impressive. I don't know who else has a run of so many movies in a row that are just so damn entertaining. When you take it from Halloween, The Fog, Escape from New York, The Thing, Christine, every single one of those is a freaking awesome
Dude, don't forget Big Trouble in Little China.
Well, then you get Starman, Big Trouble in Little China,
and Prince of Darkness.
and They Live. That's his run from 78 to 88.
How many
10-year run.
Jesus Christ.
And every single one of those is totally rewatchable, awesome, freaking just 80s entertainment.
I love that he was
the
doing
king of the 80s.
Big Trouble in Little China and Prince of Darkness at the same time. Mostly back to back, but overlap. And it shows because he has the same type of score. It almost sounds like the same music. He uses Wang.
Yeah.
There's a lot of similarities in the look of those two movies, and you could tell.
Through his career, he has brought a lot of cast back, and definitely
Kurt Russell. 2 girls from Halloween fall right over into The Fog.
Yeah.
2 girls with green eyes?
Yeah, he's got a lot of cast that he keeps bringing back all the way through all those 80s movies. But then also his crew. He's got, like, Dean Cundy works on a lot of those early 80s, late 70s, early 80s films. I want to say he did The Fog and Halloween.
If you look at Assault and then you look at Halloween and The Fog, they're very minimalist on so many things that they're like, they have these big driving forces and these big ideas, but they shrink down what they like. The Fog specifically, it's such a cool story, but you rarely see what is being talked about, and that's fine. It works in that regard. When you get to The Thing, it's the exact opposite.
Yeah.
Everything is there in excess,
Yes.
and like the grossness and the violence. That shit is legendary. And that's what
totally.
makes the movie. I mean, to me, that might be his best directing job as far as like tension.
Yeah, because like you could take all of those amazing effects out of that movie and it would still be a really effective movie of paranoia and all of that stuff. So I think, as you're pointing out,
Like a whodunit.
Yeah, as a whodunit. His direction is probably the strongest in that film. In creating tension, creating all that doubt and everything like that. But thankfully, it has all those Rob Bottin effects just to amplify it and make it one of the coolest, awesome sci-fi horror movies ever.
That is very like Lovecraftian gore, where it's so out of this world that like a dog opens his mouth and like a flower comes out of it. You're like,
what am I even looking at?
Yeah.
To your point of those first, I guess you were saying the first two as in like Halloween and The Fog being kind of this stripped down theater of the mind a bit.
It's more about what you don't see.
It's what you don't see, which he does such a good job. So yeah, it's kind of amazing to think that's the same guy who made this other film that is so explicit and showing you everything.
Yeah.
But it also works, like both ways that he approached those films totally worked when he got behind the camera and decided to approach it like that. So,
and he's really good with ensembles, because as much as you want to say that there's a main person, even in like something like Big Trouble in Little China, Jack
Very
Burton's
much an
not really
ensemble.
the main character. Like it's Wang's story pretty much.
Yeah.
Specifically The Thing. It's like, yeah, Kurt Russell's the star, but he doesn't really have more screen time than all the other guys.
Well, there's so many times in that movie where if they wanted to end it with him being the Thing, they play on could he be the Thing, yet we're watching him as supposed to be our protagonist.
Yeah, our
But
catalyst.
At any point, you could be like, he could be the Thing, so why is he my protagonist? You really don't know.
Yeah, I think people would have definitely given it some shit. Maybe us
If he
included.
turned out to be.
Because then you'd be like, that's an unreliable narrator. What was really going on in this movie? How did we see it from the perspective of the alien?
Yeah. I think The Fog is a perfect example of, the execution of The Fog isn't my favorite along like some of his other better made horror movies. Like as a horror director, I think he's done a better job with the other like standout horror films in his filmography. But I do enjoy The Fog, and what I really enjoy about The Fog is its story. I think it's a really creative ghost story. But I get a little lost with some of the side characters. Like when you're talking about, he does a great job with ensembles.
Yeah.
The performances aren't bad.
They're a little
but I think
separated in that
there's
one.
some, like I don't follow that story, but with the characters as well as I am interested in the story of the town and its lore and why these ghosts have returned and things like that. And it's a beautifully shot film, and it does have fun moments. And after that great run of about 10 years, I guess, from 78 to 88.
What did it end on? It wasn't.
They Live.
They
in
Live.
88. He didn't do an 89. I believe it's 91, I think, is when he did Memoirs of an Invisible Man with Chevy Chase.
Not terrible.
Something I didn't get a chance to rewatch, so I don't really have much recollection of it.
Some good scenes.
Yeah. But then you get to 1994, which is his last great film, in my opinion.
Yes.
One that, recently rewatching it, I've elevated it into like the top 4 or 5 favorite Carpenter films for me. In the Mouth of Madness.
Yes.
Which you mentioned Lovecraftian, and
It's got a lot of that. Yeah.
I think Carpenter is a fan of Lovecraft, and it seems evident with what he put on display in The Thing. So this was a chance for him to kind of do more of that, and get even more into that Lovecraftian world. And I just think it's a really cool, a great script.
Very cool.
I feel like it's got a little bit of a meta feel to it before Scream. In the same year as New Nightmare, whoever tries to claim that they were the first to be like a meta horror
It was
movie.
actually shot in 93, yeah.
This has a little bit of that aspect of playing on, like they mentioned Stephen King.
Kane's writing has been known to have an effect on his readers.
How this stuff is affecting the world and stuff. I just found that whole side of like Sam Neill, who does an
So
amazing
good in
job.
this movie.
He's so good in this movie.
The whole movie hinges on his performance, basically.
Sam Neill's character by the end, I mean, maybe we shouldn't spoil the movie because it's a movie movie. I think a little bit of a meta commentary on how his character turns out from the beginning to the end of the film. I just think it was just such a great ride that I didn't remember since watching it back in the 90s.
The whole movie feels like a dream.
Yes.
That's the whole thing about this movie is you don't really know what's real or what is happening because it's such a surreal tale. Starting off with him in the insane asylum already is perfect because everything else after that, when they go backwards, you're second guessing, you're like, where? I don't understand. How did he end up here? And he's a good Carpenter character because he's kind of a douchebag. He's like, he gets really close to the girl. He's like, hey, baby, and she's very uncomfortable. When they get to Hobbs End, which is just such a don't get me started on where I could go with that.
Knobs End?
Yeah, a whole bunch of shit. But everything becomes a dream right there. It's a dream you've had where you drive into a town and there's nobody there. Yeah. And then the only person that is there is the person you need at that exact moment. Somebody to answer the bell at the hotel room, and then everything else from there. Like you said, Lynch. It's very Lynch, except it actually tells you why the weirdness is happening, where Lynch just kind of lets the weirdness unfold, and it doesn't really have I mean, I love Lynch, but it's more about a meditation on things rather than telling a complete story.
Yeah, Sutter Kane.
Sutter Kane. Yeah, it's such a Stephen King.
Yeah. But that's what's weird when they actually mention Stephen King being real in that universe.
Yeah, that's meta.
And Vigo the Carpathian.
Yeah, him trying to do some kind of a southern accent.
Well, right now I'm working on diesel most of my work is I've done my farm work.
It just makes me wish we had got something more similar to this out of Carpenter in the 90s or in the 2000s.
Or in the early O's.
Yeah, because this does not look or feel like his 80s movies.
No.
But it's a really cool Carpenter movie. So it just makes me wish, any of those other movies that he put out after that felt a little bit more like this.
Just over a year later, Village of the Damned, which, like Mouth of Madness, it kind of tells a complete story, and I believe it was a remake.
Yes.
Based off of a book, so it's not an original concept, but he's done that before. But yeah, Village of the Damned being the late, great Christopher Reeve's last film, I believe. I think it was his last movie, not before he died, before the accident. And he was good in it, and I think Kirstie Alley was also at the time still somebody that people gave a fuck about. So she was in it too, and it's a creepy movie. It's a very creepy movie, and it's got the Carpenter creepiness to it. It's got the good creepy music to it. It's not his best movie. It's not as good as In the Mouth of Madness. But it's his second best movie in the 90s.
Yeah, pretty much. That's
out of the 4 or 5 he did in the 90s.
Yeah, because I believe after that you get Escape from L.A.,
which is just, take it what for it is.
It's it's got some fun moments, but it's not a great movie. And yes, you get into that era where the special effects just weren't good. Then I think you get vampires. And then you get...
Oh, I forgot about vampires with Thomas Ian Griffith and James Woods, right?
Well, James Woods. Thomas Ian Griffith is
Isn't he the main bad guy?
Is he?
Yeah.
Probably.
Terry Silver.
Yeah. That's right. Okay. And then Ghost of Mars, which I don't think either of us have
never seen.
To get some respect, we had to tear this motherfucker up.
And The Ward, which I didn't see.
Okay. I can speak briefly and cut me off after 20 seconds. The Ward stars Amber Heard. She's terrible in it.
Okay, you're cut off.
Okay.
Motherfuckers wanna get with me, lay with me, love with me.
But I just love that he is in his 70s and he's just rock starring. I don't know if you guys know this, but he's pretty much retired from filmmaking. I mean, he has been for a very long time, but these days he's getting richer than he ever made on movies because people fill up auditoriums and major arenas to see him do his scores live, and he has a full band. He tours like regular fucking hip-hop bands and pop bands do, and he makes a fortune off of it. It's almost impossible to get tickets to see Carpenter.
I'd like to check that out. I knew he was doing it, but I didn't know.
His tickets are gone.
I thought it was like a once in a while thing.
No, he doesn't.
Touring majorly.
He does it. He's become like a rock star. Imagine going to the Hollywood Bowl and just hearing Assault on Precinct 13, fucking Halloween. Okay, so I'd have to go number 5 would be Big Trouble in Little China, with Prince of Darkness almost making it, honorable mention. Number 4 is The Fog.
Go on.
Number 3 is Halloween.
Which seems surprising, but go.
Number 2 is Assault on Precinct 13.
Oh, wow. That's way
And
up there for you.
number 1 is The Thing.
The Thing. Starting at number 5 for me, I would say Escape from LA, just because I just love the way that movie looks. Number 4, In the Mouth of Madness, a new favorite of mine. Really feel like I could even move it farther up the list, but I feel like the top 3 for me are like kind of stone cold classics. Number 3 for me is Christine. Love that movie a ton. What a great movie. And then number 2 for me would be Halloween, because I still like, I'm a huge Michael Myers fan out of the kind of classic 80s masked boogeymen that you have. And my number 1 is The Thing, which I think was your number 1 as well. It's just like, that's like a perfect movie.
I don't think we're ever going to get another John Carpenter. Oh. And we should have come to terms with that 20 years ago. But yeah, it's kind of a bummer. Like, I wish he could just thrust one more out there, like, or at least collaborate on something. Or, but if that's not, sometimes people lose interest in things, and he found a new thing.
I wish he would have directed maybe like the 3rd of this new series of Halloween or something, but I don't know.
I bet he's never seen any of them.
Yeah. But if there's any of the films we've talked about, Carpenter films that you haven't seen, all of his films are entertaining up to some of those late 90s films. Some of those aren't really that entertaining.
I would argue that The Ward is not entertaining.
Yeah. But like all those ones from the 80s are, and late 70s, including 76 is Assault on Precinct 13. I think that's one that a lot of people, even some Carpenter fans, self-professed, I love Halloween, I love The Thing, I love Christine or whatever, have never really checked out Assault on Precinct 13. You should. It is a really great movie.
And a lot of people that sleep on it because they hear it's not a horror movie. It pretty much is.
Yeah.
It's a horror movie in a very different way, but when you watch it, you'll understand it.
Hey everybody, I'm John.
I'm Ben. Welcome to First of the Best here on Cinema Gulp.
Today we're going to talk about Christopher Nolan. Definitely one of our favorite modern filmmakers. I think on the show we've talked about a few filmmakers that we grew up with, but Nolan's one that we grew to, we found Nolan along the way. Ben and I were both in our early 20s probably when Nolan got his start, and he's been putting out hits ever since the early 2000s. This film that we're going to talk about, his first film, which is what we always talk about on First of the Best, following from 1998. So this was a film from the 90s. But, I didn't really know about Nolan until about 2000, 2001 when Memento came out. But ever since then, he has been one of the top filmmakers on my radar, excited about every release that he has put out since then.
One thing I love about First of the Best is that the last time we did this show was in October of last year, and we did John Carpenter, who's a filmmaker that's not really working today, at least not in film. So it's nice to, sometimes we find that good balance of doing the Wes Andersons and then going to someone like John Carpenter, who's a legend, and all his films that we talk about are kind of old. So talking about Christopher Nolan, who you're right, early 20s is when he kind of surfaced. So it's really nice to talk about someone who's still working. So when you see something new of his, you wonder, is it still kind of hearkening back to his early days? And The Following has a lot of things in it that feel Nolan. And I think one of the main reasons, John, is because he shot it, he directed it, he wrote it, and he edited it. So this reminds me the most of Memento. I mean, for obvious reasons, it's a smaller film, it's an indie film, it's a black and white film, but it has these influences of Hitchcock's Strangers on a Train. But you don't really notice that right off the bat. I think when the film finished for me, I noticed that thing about it, from the opening voiceover to the quick editing showcase with the voiceover. I kind of love Following. I think it's that showcase of classic independent film, first film, student film way of thinking, where get an interesting concept, make it black and white, fill it full of interesting dialogue, off the wall, and sometimes subdued characters and long conversations. But this goes further than that to actually be a first, second, and third act really balanced movie. So
yeah, no, I agree with that. That stood out to me as well, that the first films by these filmmakers we've talked about have a bit of a more student film feel, or just the low budget aspects really stand out from what the work that they've been able to turn in once they got established. And this one has a lot of that low budget feel, but
I thought it was a really well thought out story. It's perfectly in line with what Nolan's continued to do with kind of the non-linear storytelling, but in a way that makes the story intriguing and not just confusing. There were a couple scenes in it where when I was watching it, first kind of watched through it, I was wondering why scenes were in the order they were in, but I know Nolan's style well enough to know, okay, well, stick with this. It's gonna make sense by the end, and it fully does come around, comes full circle. We don't want to spoil the movie. It's certainly one that's worth a watch if anybody has not seen Following. I think a lot of times it's referenced as The Following because that title almost sounds more interesting or something, but it is just Following. It's a writer who wants to research people, be a people watcher basically, and he follows people in their daily life, watches them from afar, and eventually one of the people that he's following notices that they're being followed and approaches him, and this guy happens to be a burglar. And so these two guys, the writer and the burglar, start kind of basically breaking into homes. He's at that moment when the burglar guy takes him on his first little cat burglar escapade, I got the feeling of Man Bites Dog, where you have this guy showing you the ins and outs of his criminal lifestyle and bringing somebody into that world. It's not so much about what he's willing to take or getting away with actual jewels or something expensive. He just likes to mess with people. He likes to upset people's lives and worlds and kind of make them realize what they have by taking a few items and leaving the house in a mess where they know that a burglar has been in the house. It just makes them take a step back and look at their lives and say, well, what do I really have in my life? What is important in this life? And what's important about the stuff that I own? Is it important or not?
It's like a diary. They hide it, but actually they want someone to see it. That's what I do. Concealment, display, flip sides of the same coin. This way they know that someone's seen it. That's what it's all about. Interrupting someone's life, making them see all the things that they took for granted.
So I thought that setup was really interesting in the first act. A typical Nolan where it has twists and turns and kind of a very twist ending to the story. But I thought that initial setup was very interesting, how it wasn't about getting away with jewels and money. It was more about this introspective look into people's lives and making them look internally as well. In a non-linear way, you start to see moments where the characters look different at this time of the story, and you realize, okay, this is happening before, you're not really sure. In a very typical Nolan way, you're like, I'm not sure where this is set in this actual final story.
I think there's really a lot of great themes in this movie. Take it away to show them what they had. I love when Cobb says that, and he's like tipping over the box of photos and memorabilia.
Go back and buy all this stuff from the shelves of the insurance money. They'll have to think for the first time in a long time why they wanted all this stuff, what it's for. You take it away. You show them what they had.
This movie only has Cobb, the woman, and the young man are how they're credited in the movie. Cobb reminds me of Trent if he were a cat burglar. Trent from Swingers as a cat burglar. He just has that swagger and suave about it.
Yeah, he was a cool character.
Yeah, and that guy played by Alex Haw was, to me, like the scene stealer of the movie for sure. I mean, obviously he had the juiciest part, but it's a very interesting concept, like following people. But it's made early in the beginning that it's not about following women or any kind of sexual thing. It's just about following people, seeing where they are and what they do and where they go. And that's just like a tiny bit more of a leap than people watching, say like at a bar or something, a little bit more excessive. And they are kind of creeps. I mean, there's no real good person in the story to begin with. I mean, that's not spoiling anything. I mean, you said the concept, just following people around is creepy, even if you're well-intentioned, so.
Yeah. You were pointing out Cobb. That is the character, that is DiCaprio's character name, I believe, in Inception.
Ah, yeah.
So, and then a lot of his films have characters that don't have names. Like I think Tenet, the main character, John David Washington, is just called the protagonist. That's something that even from this early film, he wasn't really giving a name to the character. It's just more of a description about who they are. There's a gangster. He's not in the film a lot, but there's a gangster called the Bald Man.
And then there's the policeman. Very, very tiny cast. The story feels like a Nolan movie, and a very young beginner Nolan movie is, like you said, it has the twists and turns. It's cleverly written. People's intentions you find out at different times. There's non-linear structure.
You know, one step forward, two steps back the whole way through.
You know, being his feature film debut, he designed it obviously to be as inexpensive as possible. Some scenes they had to heavily rehearse because they didn't have enough 16 millimeter film stock to like shoot multiple takes, as most indie films are like that. But he didn't have money for lighting either, which is same thing for Clerks. They go black and white when you don't have lighting. It's easier to light with room. It's easier to light with natural lighting, things like that. He used his storytelling skills with the shooting and the cutting because he shot this movie. And even though he doesn't shoot or edit his other films, you see how precise and like perfectionist he is, because if his strong suits are not shooting and editing, shooting specifically in this movie, the shots are very basic storytelling steps. Like it's just there's nothing that stands out as a brilliant shot, but it moves the story along at this perfect pace, and that's what you would expect from Nolan. Same with the editing. He knows how to pre-lap into a scene. He knows how to bring audio from one scene to another through a transition. A lot of these early films that we watch, things like Loveless and stuff like that, and specifically Dark Star, those guys at those times, they don't know how to transition from one scene to the next. It's just a cut, you know?
Yeah.
So it's nice to see like Nolan obviously knows all those aspects, and he's really good at fluid storytelling, even when he's doing it all himself.
Yeah. The non-linear, aspects of this film, they stood out as definitely, a hallmark of Nolan right from the beginning. And all of his films that do non-linear, which is pretty much everything. I want to say,
I guess just I guess only Batman Begins does it, I think, and then the other ones are pretty linear.
Oh,
right?
but maybe the other two Batmans aren't.
Yeah,
as...
but Batman Begins very non-linear. Yeah.
Yeah. The clues that are left when you're able to see a film on a second viewing. Now, I didn't rewatch Following, but I did kind of scan through it again after getting through it and being like, now I understand what these non-linear moments are building up to. So I kind of scanned through it to get a grasp of what you learn at what point of the story. But the way that he drops clues, when you've seen the film once and you know the full story, the clues that he puts right in front of your face as a filmmaker are amazing. And the film that stands out the most is The Prestige, but right here from this first film, it's just like, it's so cool to see like what he is willing to show you when you don't know what you're seeing in these earlier moments of the film. And
well, I think Memento is very much like that as well.
Yeah.
Memento, the whole story is in front of your face the whole time, but because of how he told the story, you don't see it.
But you were talking about, how he approaches, like, I think most of the films after this do have a bit more style. He's got a bigger budget, he's got a better handle of how he wants to tell a story visually. And so you do get some very iconic and beautiful shots in every film moving forward. Not so much in this one. It's got that very indie feel, but he's working to his strengths of storytelling in this one and not so much the visual aspect of the film. But the guy who did the score is the same guy who did Following, Memento, Insomnia.
David Julian, before he went to Hans Zimmer.
And Prestige.
This guy is awesome. And this little tiny small score is so manic and awesome and fits the movie so perfectly. And again, that kind of harkens to what he does later, where he, when the Joker comes in and out of The Dark Knight, it's got a specific sound that really amps up what you're supposed to be feeling.
The way he approaches filmmaking, he's kind of a scientist or a mathematician. The way that he structures his stories.
Structure the way into this storytelling. So what I wanted to do was to show something in reverse to suggest the backwards movement of the film.
Most of his films have kind of a cold and clinical feel to them. There isn't a lot of warmth to the films, whether it's the cinematography, the worlds that they feel like they're set in, just the performances. Sometimes there's not a lot of warmth in his films, but it's something that he's made work across his entire career. Every film is still amazing and fascinating. His approach to structure is unlike any other filmmaker out there, I would say. Like Quentin Tarantino was praised for a non-linear structure, in his heyday, and he still does that in most films, I would say, as well. But it feels very different than what Nolan is doing with his non-linear. Like Nolan's is about clues at the right time that you don't know you're seeing, that are all going to culminate into an amazing twist-filled ending to some degree. Quentin Tarantino's is
it's for different reasons,
playful and fun.
I call Tarantino's nonlinear structure more like Easter egg nonlinear, where it's like, hey, did you realize that this scene was before that one? Look, you can tell because this guy's wearing that shirt. It's like, it doesn't necessarily make or break the story or necessarily give you clues. Nolan sets it up for specific reasons. And one thing I really like about this film, though, as opposed to like his other ones that don't really do it, is it sets up certain plot points and characters with long, quiet conversation and dialogue between two people. Like, obviously, it's a different kind of film than his other ones that get bigger. Like Inception just never stops, and the Batman movies, which I love, they never stop. And I mean, even something like Interstellar doesn't really have like nice, quiet, slow moments. It's just insane. I mean, all these movies are good. Yeah, I like how this one starts with a conversation in in a diner. And it's a long scene, and it tells you kind of everything you need to know until the twists and turns and stuff. But it sets up who these people are. Like, what do you do? I mean, we've already seen it, so it's not a tell, don't show. We've already seen it. But I like that it does that. And obviously, again, that's because it's an indie film. You tell your story through, I mean, two people sitting at a diner's a trope for indie films, for sure, but it's what they're saying to each other that really matters. And I like it. I like seeing how Nolan's mind worked at such a young age, and see how it's blossomed to something that it is now,
And you do see the seeds of Memento. As you say, this feels the most like Memento to some degree. You see the seeds there of him saying, well, how can I play with structure? And in his next film, break structure in a way that no one had ever done before and really hasn't done since. I mean, his films get more fascinating with what he's willing to do as he goes along. Well, Memento is still one of his best, so that is almost one of his most interesting, intricately structured films all the way through.
I've heard people say this movie's boring. I find it rather engaging, but you have to let yourself in and get enveloped into it first. If you buy into the concept right off the bat, then you're guessing the whole movie.
Even in the late 90s, if he was able to cast it with a few known actors, I think this could have been the film that already put him on the map before Memento, that people would have actually seen.
Yeah.
But I think he was working with probably some local, London talent or whatever, who are very good. But
Alex Hall, who played Cobb, who was probably, the best part of the movie. This is the only thing he ever did as an actor.
Oh, really?
This is it.
Wow.
This is it. He graduated from Princeton, and he is an architect.
Got it.
So okay. I guess maybe he's just a buddy of Nolan's or something.
Which is what Nolan would be doing if he wasn't a filmaker.
Probably. Yeah.
Like he's an architect of films, basically.
Or a musician pulling rabbits out of hats or something.
Yeah.
The other guy, the main guy that played the young man, Jeremy Theobald, he is a working actor. He does stuff to this day.
I felt like I had seen him in other things, but not where he stood out. And I remembered him.
He was
just
in
like,
Batman
Begins.
Begins.
Kind of a familiar face. Oh, is he?
Yeah.
Who is he in that one?
He was a waterboard technician.
I was gonna say, like crook number 7. One thing that stood out to me early in Nolan's career, because Memento was my second favorite movie of 2001, I want to say. Right from the start, I had him as a best director, as a runner-up best picture to Lord of the Rings, in that year for myself. So
I remember he won the MTV Movie Award, Best New Director.
Mr. Christopher Nolan!
Because Memento was obviously not going to be some Oscar movie. It was just too far off the radar, and it was just it should have been.
Should have been at least
Guy Pearce should have at least gotten a Best Actor nomination.
Or at least a screenplay nod for the film itself.
Yeah.
Early on, falling in love with him just off that essentially first film. Every film after, I was noticing at least one of his visual styles that he was bringing to at least he probably still does this if I'm really paying attention to some of the later films, but in all of those first 4 or 5 films, he used a lot of like flash imagery with very quick cuts. Fight Club, when you get those brief images of Tyler Durden, it's so quick you don't even know you've seen it.
It's like one frame. Yeah.
It's almost like subliminal. I was kind of when sitting down to watch Following, that was one of the things I was like, is that going to be in this film? Are we going to see that start the genesis of that right here from his first film? And he didn't do that. He did the nonlinear storytelling, but he didn't have any flash imagery.
I'm surprised he didn't, because if you've ever shot on 16 millimeter film, when the film reel gets to its end, the last dozen or so frames are the lights, because they get exposed when the rest of the film canister doesn't get exposed. So in film school, when we were shooting on film, we'd always splice the ends, because they start to like dissolve the color of that final shot. So where you get a whole mix of the colors of that final shot. I shot in a bar, and so the end shot had all these colors of like beer cans and stuff like that. So I chopped those and I spliced them in for like transitional cuts and stuff. And people were always like, what is that shot? How did you create that? I'm like, dude, it was just the end of the film. Again, it's really stripped down basic stuff, but it works like an A+ on a storytelling level, you know? Maybe because he was so persistent and accurate with shooting himself, he knew to get the best person and only work with specific people, because obviously the shots changed drastically when he got more money. Though I still think Pfister feels a lot, Pfister from Memento feels a lot more like Nolan from this film.
Yeah. The actors or the main characters are certainly styled after him to some degree, the way he still dresses to this day in his suits.
Always in suits, yeah.
The lead writer character very much seemed like it was Nolan putting himself into his film, which a lot of early a lot of early filmmakers and writers do that. They
write what you know
themselves in some way. Yeah, write what you know. So I thought that was something that was there because of the nonlinear structure. The theme that runs through every Nolan film in some way, shape, or form is time, is his obsession with time and how he can play with it as a filmmaker, or how he can make it an integral part of the story. While it was unfolding in front of my eyes, I was slightly confused, but I know the filmmaker I'm watching and that he is going to make sense of anything that I am not fully grasping why this is what's being told to me at this point of the story.
Yeah.
So it's not exactly the same way that he plays with time in some of his more intricate films, but it certainly is messing with the timeline of the story. So
things I noticed from this movie was imagery, like photographs. Obviously a huge part of Memento is the photographs. And then even Insomnia, like Insomnia, Memento, his more quote unquote indie ones. I think Insomnia was kind of his first kind of larger mid-budget type of American movie, but I still find it to be very small scale. Those three you can put in a box, because those are before pre-Batman. After Batman, it's like, ooh, it's huge, you know.
Yeah.
Everything's big. Images Standing Still, which is pictures, a moment caught in time. He's very smart. I mean, we've always known he's very smart with this film. The first little twist / reveal happens right at the halfway mark of this movie. It's a shorter movie, made for $6,000, you know. So how much film stock? You can't make an hour and 45-minute movie with $6,000. Surprised you made as long a movie as he did with $6,000.
$6,000, not $6 million. Like most times when you're talking about
$6,000.
Yeah, think millions. Oh, even if it's small amount of millions, but this is $6,000.
I used to take the money, now I make the money. Saw my hoe with a trick and told her make the money.
His movies that do have twists and reveals, you do find out things at the halfway point before you find things out completely at the end, and it could completely shift by that, you know.
Yeah,
I love that, because you think you know the big thing right at the middle, but you only know a little bit, or you know less than you think, you know.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. That's my whole thing with, like, he shows you clues that if you've watched a film a second time now and you have all the information at your disposal, he's putting things right in front of your face early on, halfway point or whatever, that you don't realize is as important. And a lot of times, like you were pointing out, things like the pictures, it's a simple object that you don't know is as important to the story until the story is complete. And he has a lot of, it kind of goes hand in hand with what I was talking about with the flash imagery. He also has just a lot of insert shots of objects that you aren't exactly sure why that seems important at the moment. But with every film of his, it all comes full circle. Even the ones that are somewhat confusing or or too smart for their own good. I think Interstellar and Tenet a little bit kind of a mess.
There's no, I don't think I see any parallels between Following and Interstellar.
No, not
might be something in there, but I doubt it.
But he does, in Following, he does have some specific close-ups of small items that don't seem as important at the time, or just they seem, there's a context for why you're seeing them at that moment, but that context changes when you've seen the full story. But Nolan maybe doesn't get enough credit for really being the guy that pretty much does have a twist in almost every film in some way. One of my favorite films by him is The Prestige, and I walked out of that film saying, yeah, I liked it. You know, another Nolan film, had some great stuff in it, but I didn't really solidify my feelings until I could watch it a second time. And that was months down the road when I was renting it on video. I did not watch it a second time in the theater. I didn't rush back and go, oh my gosh, I got to understand all the twists and turns that this movie put in front of my face in the last minute. I thought I got it. And when I watched the second time, it was like a completely different experience. Knowing the full story and what you're seeing all along the way. And I think all of his films are like that. They're almost more rewarding on their second viewing.
Memento is one of those movies I remember in the early aughts being talked about, like people were cutting it to try to see if they could put it in normal order to see what happens. And people are like, well, it's not as interesting. I'm like, well, of course it's not. It's very simple if it's in order. You know? There's so much of it that transfers over to Memento. I mean, we've already talked about that, but even now that I'm thinking about it, even 3 lead characters, you have a woman, the young woman, Cobb, and the young man. Cobb is like Teddy because he, you know, and this isn't giving anything away. Like Cobb's character is like Teddy, where he's ulterior motives, stringing somebody for whatever reason. And then you have Natalie, who's like the young lady. And then obviously, you know, and then Lenny, obviously, I mean, it's obvious, very obvious transferring over of sort of the idea of characters from one film to the next.
As I was saying, how the relationship between Cobb and the writer evolves from where it started. If you've seen Memento, you could make some parallels of what we're talking about. Well, Insomnia was the one that I was really like, man, I need to revisit this because I haven't watched it since the early 2000s when it
I love that movie, man.
Came out, and it was just like, man, it's so good.
It's so good.
Once it hits your lips, it's so good.
Probably Al Pacino's last truly amazing performance. I'm not saying it's his last great performance, but it's the last one where he just carries it. Yeah. And you're so in his head with his, well, obviously his insomnia. I love him in that movie.
I really loved the dynamic between Pacino and Hilary Swank, like telling her, like trying to teach her to be a good cop, but then realizing now she's kind of investigating him and his way of like, he knows that he's bringing the heat on himself by letting her continue the investigation and kind of guiding her to make the right decisions. And it's just so beautiful the way it ends with her being willing to save his reputation in those final moments. She's going to throw away the bullets that show.
Just love it. I could see him in the fog.
And it's like, no, don't allow yourself to be corrupted the way that I was. Stay a good, honest police officer. And again, that's one of those amazing little twists to that story. That movie's got lots of twists, but just the way it ends feels like there's so much gravity at the end of that film, and I don't think people give some of his early films enough credit for their twists.
I hear people having insight, and we can move over to just talking about Nolan's filmography because we've talked about Following. It's an excellent first movie. It's one of my favorite first movies that we've done on First of the Best, right there with like Hard Eight. It's right there with it might be Hard Eight and this one are my favorite of all the ones we've done so far. And Bottle Rocket, maybe.
I mean, Hard Eight's got John C. Reilly and Philip Seymour Hoffman, Samuel Jackson.
No,
so I'm going to pick Hard Eight
like,
over this one, but you're right.
I don't mean from star power. I mean from just like being so impressed. Just being so impressed by somebody's first movie, regardless of talent or money, just knowing that they were going to go on to do what they did. It all makes sense from watching this movie, why they're as good as they are.
But, you know, that's been the idea behind the show all along, is that even for us film lovers who love these filmmakers specifically, we haven't brought ourselves to watch what's considered their early work before they had star power, before they knew all their tricks.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting to force ourselves essentially to come around and finally watch those films. And I'm always excited when we have a new episode coming, because it means, yeah, I'm going to see something from a filmmaker I love, whether I love the film or not. It's something, it's the beginning of their career. And it's just such a fascinating look into where they will go with their storytelling and their filmmaking techniques.
This movie was made by Next Wave Films, which did a lot of 90s indie stuff. IFC, it was like a branch of IFC. IFC closed them down, I think, not long after this movie came out. But it's great that it's $6,000 production. It's great that IFC is just, nobody even thinks about it anymore because everything's like Disney and Marvel and you know, and it's just like, I remember the days in high school and stuff like that of really loving IFC and finding lots of good shit.
Pulp Fiction.
When he got to Batman Begins, then everything after that was on a much grander scale than his first three films that were very indie centric kind of. Yeah. But once he did start making these grander films, his use of practical effects does stand out. In today's day and age, the fact that he doesn't have an overabundance of CGI in his films and has, you know, still willing to do real practical effects, whether it's spinning hallways in Inception or flipping trucks for real in Dark Knight movies and things like that. Even Tenet, I think, has a lot of real, you know, practical effects in it. In today's movie making world, so many, even a lot of the top filmmakers, even like a Spielberg or whatever, they just rely on Cameron, you know, they rely on CGI just too much at this point. And so many of those filmmakers came from an era where it was all practical effects, and they were the ones that created the greatest effects of all time in the 80s and 90s to some degree that we all still talk about, whether it's Jurassic Park or Aliens or whatever. And they've given over to making CGI fests, which really sucks. And Nolan is sticking with this practical approach. So I really still love him for that.
There's a few facets in why filmmakers are either capable of doing that or want to do that. And it's, you still have to really love what you do. That's one, but that's a small one, because someone like Sam Raimi loves what he does, but he had to turn Spider-Man into CGI, you know, just, he had to, you know, but a lot of it isn't. And that's a good thing. But like, and then you have to have, which Nolan has a great deal of these days, which is power in the industry. He can tell the studios what the fuck he wants to do, as opposed to them telling him what to do. So there's things like that. It's the passion, but it's also like, have you gotten yourself to the point where you can do? So I guess it depends on the person, depends on their status, all that kind of stuff. You know, I mean, lazy filmmaker, it's like, why are you in the business if you just want to make everything a big, you know, even George Lucas, like when he did the prequels, he wasn't trying to be lazy with making everything CGI. He thought he was revolutionizing stuff. Yes,
he did. And it just wasn't ready yet.
Yeah.
Which, to Cameron's credit, I wish he wasn't doing so much CGI in his later years, but almost every project that he's made overly CGI, whether it's Titanic or the two Avatars, he waited for the right time when the technology could accomplish his dream.
But Nolan's one of the last few people, and that's what makes him so much better. It's not that he's just a good writer and a good storyteller. Yeah, it's because he makes you feel like the world's there. Even something like Inception. Inception's one of his greatest accomplishments visually, storytelling. I think it's not one of my favorite movies of his, but it's definitely something that, like, I can't believe it turned out as good as it did for what he was trying to do with it, you know. Mm-hmm. So let's talk top three. Is 3 good?
Yeah,
I don't want to get in too much because I might have some like switcheroos on some of the other ones, but I can go. Insomnia is my 3rd favorite Nolan movie, followed by Batman Begins, because I think it's the best Batman movie. It's one of the best comic book movies. And then Memento is my favorite Nolan movie.
Prestige is my favorite. Memento is very close on its heels. It really is just such a wonderful, unique film that no one has been able to recreate a similar structure. And then I would go Batman Begins as my 3rd favorite. I agree with you right there that it is probably the best or one of the best ever comic book movies. It is definitely the best origin story of a comic book character, in my opinion. A lot of it has to do with I'm someone who likes to see fanciful stories told in a grounded, real way, which is what everyone gives Nolan credit for. Oh my God, The Dark Knight. It's such a grounded, realistic movie or whatever, but a telling of a superhero story. But Batman Begins does it better. It's grounded in a different way, and it's making you believe why a person would dress as a bat and fight crime. Like, that should never seem realistic in any real world setting, but he makes it feel realistic. And so I give that film a ton of credit for telling a story that shouldn't feel real in such a real way.
Hey everyone, welcome to First of the Best here on Cinema Gulp. I'm Ben, and I'm going to be talking about Tony Scott's first film, The Hunger.
And I'm John, and I'm going to talk about Ridley Scott's first film, The Duellists, plural. So The Duellists, this is Ridley Scott's first feature, 1977. Ridley Scott took a long time to get his first feature going. He toiled away for many, many years doing advertising, and was 40 before he was able to make his first feature film. The Duelist is a short story by Joseph Conrad, I believe, about two French soldiers during the Napoleonic Wars. And they fight and duel many times over the course of their life over nothing, in my opinion. Over honor, as you say, Ben. So, yeah, The Duelist was, like many films by Ridley Scott, a beautiful film to look at. But as a story, I did not find it engaging one bit. I found this movie to be kind of a slog to get through from a narrative standpoint. There wasn't a whole lot I really liked about this movie. It really is just episodic of going back and forth of showing these two guys fighting each other at different points in their history, different points throughout the war. They get promoted and have to kind of move on to different levels of dueling. They move up to a cavalry charge. That's one scene that was kind of edited very strangely, in my opinion. There's some really strange, choppy editing in this movie. But yeah, I got more I can talk about. But Ben, what were your thoughts on The Duelists?
It looked beautiful, like you said. It's got beautiful cinematography. Especially the exterior shots. Some of them were just amazing. The set design was cool. At first, I kind of was laughing at the costumes because they're like beefeater looking costumes, and it looked like Harvey Keitel just doesn't look right in that costume. It's just laughable.
Behind me, you got your main cast here: Harvey Keitel and what is it, Keith Carradine?
Keith Carradine. It's one of the Carradines.
The Carradine's confused.
It's not Kill Bill, and it's not Revenge of the Nerds. Yeah.
It might be like his son or something. I don't know who's related to who. They both do not fit this role. They're supposed to be playing Frenchmen. They bring their American accents for the most part.
They don't even try.
They don't even try, and it takes you
it's
out
like
of the movie.
Kevin Costner'd it completely.
Can you fight? I see no reason whatever for us to fight. What reason would you like? Shall I spit in your face?
These guys, Harvey Keitel was like straight out of Mean Streets almost, and
yeah.
And Keith Carradine should have had a cowboy hat on. I don't know. They just were not French soldiers.
No, Keith Carradine seemed like he was a businessman on Wall Street in this movie.
And like many directors' first films, the studio sometimes gets involved a little bit too much and dictates too many things and doesn't let an auteur or someone like Ridley Scott, who's shown to be a visionary, truly put his own vision forth. He had different actors in mind for this. Actors who were European or English and would have sold the French aspect a lot better, I'm sure. The studio wanted these guys.
Were either one of these guys anybody at that time yet? I'm not sure. I don't.
Well, Harvey Keitel, I know, had things like Mean Streets already, I believe.
Oh, I guess you're right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Isn't it crazy how he looked old even back then? Like,
I know.
When they're closing up on his face, he's got really wrinkly eyes.
Yeah. He's a weathered dude. I do like his hairstyle in the movie. It's pretty cool. He had the better look. In fact, I probably liked him better than Keith Carradine in the film.
Yeah, and he wasn't in enough of it.
But he's not in as much.
Yeah.
But I do not get his motivation. I don't get why they duel. It's there. Like you see what happens and why the first duel takes place, but it's not a strong enough reason, in my opinion, and the fact that they continue it for
like 15 years.
15 years or whatever it is, that didn't make for a strong narrative for me.
Yeah, it's just this ongoing thing, but they always start out, and I appreciated that there were so many duels in it,
Like it wasn't just like 1, 2, or 3. Like there was an arm wrestling contest, and then then they're duking it out and getting super tired in one, and the final one was pretty lackluster. I thought, like, we have 2 shots or whatever, but you just don't see Harvey Keitel in any of the scenes until it's like another duel, pretty much.
Exactly. Yeah. So you don't get to know much about him or what he's thinking about in the interim.
Who seems like the more interesting character?
The film's shortcomings are its script to some degree. And I feel that about a lot of Ridley Scott's movies, that his strongest movies obviously have the better scripts. You could say that about any filmmaker. If they've got a great script to work from, they can potentially make a great film. But, even Ridley Scott's movies that are still great to look at or interesting, but aren't the best, a lot of times it's because the script falters. And he's not a screenwriter. Some of the filmmakers we like to talk about in the show do both. And you can really see that their vision was started on the page as well.
From a directorial standpoint, it's a pretty good first movie as far as like execution and how it looks and how it feels. But like you said, they casted it wrong and the script wasn't there.
As we like to talk about on First to the Best, we like to talk about what we see in this first film that maybe translates into some of their later films. And I do think, I've always thought there's moments in Alien, Ridley Scott's second feature, that when it comes to the way he cuts away from the violence, in a horror movie, it makes sense. It's very quick. You see this flash of violence and you kind of cut away from it very fast. Sometimes that works, and it worked in Alien perfectly. But in this, during some of the duels, they cut away so quick from a moment of violence or whatever the finale of the duel, and they just cut to the next scene without a resolution. It felt very disjointed and weird.
Yeah, they did that several times too, because when the audio drops so fast and hard, it really throws you off.
Yeah, the sound design was just hard to understand people sometimes. There was a lot of poorly executed moments during the duel in terms of the sound design that could have made it make more sense of what you're seeing on screen. Sound and image, they work together so well. You really need that to help when sometimes you have kind of choppy editing. The sound can smooth it out, but it doesn't. It makes it even more choppy in this movie.
So it was a short by Joseph Conrad?
Yeah.
That's interesting because I love Joseph Conrad works, and they made Heart of Darkness into Apocalypse Now. One of my favorite books, Youth. I love Joseph Conrad.
I was hoping for a little better than that film, but first features aren't always that's what they are. They're there for the guys to learn, to get their first opportunity, to prove they know how to work the camera. And that was proven. I mean, the movie is beautiful. I think that final shot of Harvey Keitel standing on the ledge there or whatever, like looking over the valley, is pretty breathtaking.
Amazing.
I mean, that's one thing that Ridley's always been able to do through his whole career, is give us beautiful landscapes. Like anytime even if it's an alien world, he gives you this landscape shot that is breathtaking and awe-inspiring. And that is still in this movie. His career, I feel, takes a shift at G.I. Jane. So we've got, after The Duelist, everyone knows Alien, a movie of basic perfection. We don't need to talk too much about Alien. It obviously is the reason why we all love Ridley Scott so much, for the most part. But his movies in the 80s are some strange choices. We have a whole review on Blade Runner and how kind of slow that movie is. It's still visually, like everything he makes, visually amazing, but most of his 80s movies kind of have that problem. Legend, Someone to Watch Over Me, like they're not his strongest features. Once you get into the 90s, Thelma and Louise, which is one of his best movies ever, maybe second or third best movie. I feel like with G.I. Jane, his editing style became quicker and choppier. I feel like, I don't know specifically if he started using digital cameras on that film or on Gladiator, if he's using digital cameras or not.
Definitely not on G.I. Jane.
At least by the time you get to stuff like Matchstick Men, it feels very digital the way it looks. I feel like his style kind of became more quick cuts, like quicker cut, not as fluid, but I still love so many movies from that era. I mean, Gladiator's great. I love Black Hawk Down. American Gangster is one of my favorites of his. I mean, he's got so many really, really strong films, in my opinion. It's kind of makes one great one and two all right films, and then one great one and then two all right films.
I love Black Hawk Down. That's sort of like the American version of Dunkirk, where it's like all these things happening at once, not a real not a main character per se, you know, like
No,
I mean they're very different movies.
Another thing that I love about Ridley Scott, he's one of my favorite history teachers. I feel like his historical dramas come to life in ways that a lot of other filmmakers don't. I guess you seem to not like some of what he did with Gladiator. I think that really stands out as a reason why I love him as a history filmmaker, a filmmaker who puts that kind of time, puts a time on screen that not many other filmmakers have been able to bring to life. Part of his career started as a production designer. He did like 15 to 20 years working in advertising and production designing for the BBC before he did his first feature. So that's why I think a lot of his films have such strong art direction, like a la an Alien or a Blade Runner, like so distinct, because he had a big hand in making sure those visuals came to life the way he wanted them to.
And that's always one of the strongest things of his work, for sure.
He's not a one-note director. He hasn't really made comedies per se, but he's made movies that have a lot of humor to them.
Yeah, Matchstick Men is probably the closest.
To
I love that
movie. You can't forget The Martian, a Golden Globe Best Picture comedy winner. The one collaborator that always stands out to me that I don't have to look up is Hans Zimmer. Hans Zimmer has scored a lot of his movies, I think 6 of his movies, and it usually stands out. It's usually one of the strongest points. I mean, even when you've got a Ridley Scott movie that brings a lot of strong points, like, great visuals and strong storytelling, great actors, the score, especially if it's by Hans, always stands out and really helps make the movie.
The Gladiator score definitely stands out. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Moving on to Tony Scott, the late, great Tony Scott. John, I think I've told you this several times, he was the first director when I was a kid that made me want to make films, or at least be a part of films in some way, to where I watched Top Gun. A lot of people watched it and said, oh, I want to be a fighter pilot. I was like, I want to be the person that makes that movie, so that's how far back I'd go with Tony Scott. Born in East London, 1944, unfortunately took his own life back in August of 2012. As with so many of his first films, John, this was the only time that Scott worked with South African-born documentary filmmaker Stephen Goblat. Though the DP went on and did a whole bunch of other stuff and had a really great career, the two never worked again together after The Hunger. It was both their feature-length debut, though, but his aesthetic, it comes through so crystal clear. And, using different editors and using different cinematographers, he's collaborated a couple of times. He had this really interesting sort of trifecta of films from 1990 to 1991. He had 3 films released in 90 and 91. Revenge, Last Boy Scout, and Days of Thunder. He was working like a son of a bitch at that point. When he did Top Gun, he used that he collaborated with that DP a few times in Beverly Hills Cop 2 and Days of Thunder. But then after that, he would use different ones, and it's really interesting because you would think that he collaborated with the same people all the time because his films have this real distinct look to them, and in knowing and doing some more research on his filmmaking process, it just throws that all to him and gives him that much credit because he obviously picks people that share his, sense of color and sense of lighting and stuff like that, and angles, but he's got to be the one to kind of create that. And because he's so consistent with that, I found it amazing. I mean, after using an array of DPs, but always keeping that orange, red color palette, so
very distinct to Tony, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and that brings me to The Hunger, because not so much in this one, and I love talking about this movie because I think The Hunger is a great first movie. I think it's, it's a better than average first movie for sure. But I love watching it, even if it's not the most entertaining movie in the world to some people. I love watching little things about someone whose career I've watched my entire life and picking out parts because, oh my God, I mean, just the silhouettes, like the close-up silhouettes, the slightly sharpened where the blue light is flooding through the blinds and it just floods the frame. Did the same thing in Top Gun. Top Gun has some of that orange and red. But during like the sex scene specifically, he uses that blue, and it's gorgeous. You know, it has this really interesting look to it. This movie didn't do that well. Made less than $6 million. Didn't do great at Cannes when it was first released. I think right now it holds like a 55% on Rotten Tomatoes, which I don't give a fuck about Rotten Tomatoes. But
that's a shame.
It was dedicated in the memory of Tony Scott's brother, Frank. And I guess Blade Runner was also dedicated to Frank?
Yeah, I read that.
Yeah, that's cool. So this movie is sleek, it's sexy, it's gothic, it's set in New York, but most of it is shot in London, which is interesting. Katherine Bigelow, who John probably remembers from his favorite Halloween mixer movie, Repulsion.
Oh, yeah.
Susan Sarandon, just a young, gorgeous Susan Sarandon. And David Bowie, and of course, one of the unsung heroes of the 80s, Cliff DeYoung, who's just such a great character actor of the 80s.
the boyfriend, Susan Sarandon's boyfriend?
Yeah. I just love the imagery in this movie. I love the imagery of bats and the word, even though the word vampire is never used at all. I love the music, especially the opening scene. I call it kind of like a New York punk rock scene, vampires. Whole opening scene's like a big music montage, and that's perfect because that's kind of what Tony Scott was coming from, commercials and music video and things like that.
White on white, translucent black capes, back on the rack.
And it throws out, this movie has two very distinct, loud scenes. Kind of the opening scene, it throws out this big musical number, which is fast and fun. And then the final scene is very loud, and there's a lot of stuff going on with the sound design, which, you know, you could call kind of student filmish, kind of Lynchian sort of. But I love how it's pieced together. It's fun. It's someone creating something interesting with the sound design. But
I was really impressed. I was really, really impressed with David Bowie. I thought he did an excellent job in this role. Eventually he is covered up by a lot of makeup, and he really, really sells the performance of the old man. I was very, very impressed with him when he gets to those stages where he is old and decrepit and can barely move, and you don't even think that there's a young man underneath all that and doing that performance. So it's kind of a tale of two movies. The first half is kind of David Bowie and Katherine Deneuve's story, and the second half focuses more on Deneuve and Susan Sarandon.
Yeah.
And I find the first half more interesting. I feel like this is a wonderful companion piece to Interview with a Vampire and Let Me In, because those are the films that deal with the terrible side of, you know, living forever and just everyone thinks being a vampire is fun and cool, but these movies really tell you why you would not want to become a vampire.
That's exactly what this movie does. It shows it in a sad light, a lonely light. Even though this is not an action movie, to me, it feels like Tony Scott so much. Like, and when you're watching it, there's moments that don't, but then just, he's such an interesting filmmaker to me. Like, every single angle, and no matter if it's an exterior or interior shot, specifically interior, you always know it's him for some reason. Like, even someone walking down the sidewalk, it just feels like him. Sometimes it's when he uses music and when he doesn't use music. And it's interesting that he was learning all that stuff in this film, and how much of it he's, like, we were talking about Katherine Bigelow's Loveless, where not much of that carried over really into like her bigger films. There's so much in The Hunger that, again, it's not an action movie, but it has all those Scott things. You know, like I said, light flooding the frame, the music, earlier Scott transitions. It really shows so much about like him just being such a master class, dare I say, of like visual storytelling to me.
So this is the fourth film we're talking about in this series, and it's the first one where we really feel like the director's trademarks do translate beyond that first film.
That's true.
But the use of music later in the movie, the classical music, where Deneuve is playing this song on the piano, this classical
the flower
song.
duet.
Which is like it's a song we've all heard, but when she explains what it's about, that it's like these two women serenading each other about thinking about going down a stream that's dreamlike or something, and in that moment where it's about the two women kind of making that connection and potentially seducing each other, it just worked for me. It was really, I think there was some great use of music all throughout, and I thought that was a really, really cool scene.
See, the reason I'm smiling is because my next thing was gonna say, though it's not a perfect film, and here's why, and it's that scene that you're talking about.
Oh, you don't like that?
No. Okay, I think the whole movie's great, but here's my thing on that scene. So let's look at the blatantly obvious wet white T-shirt moment with Susan Sarandon. That's so obvious.
Can we pause it?
And they must have put her in a freezer and then took her out immediately, if you know what I'm saying. And it's playing to the flower duets when they cut to that part. And I'm not complaining, don't get me wrong, but it was clearly supposed to be something very serious, sexy, and intimate. And to me, it just comes off like something you'd see on Howard Stern's Butt Bongo Fiesta or something. Like, it's almost like it's like a Red Shoe Diary thing, but played for laughs and like a spoof comedy. Because like, oh, look, I got water all over where my freezing nipple is.
Well, I think for me, because this movie was billed as the lesbian vampire movie,
right? That's what
it was
it's known
something
as,
that
yeah.
I'm kind of like waiting of like, okay, well, obviously we're leading up to what is going to be the lesbian stuff. And you're right, it plays out kind of like silly with that exact moment of the spilling on the shirt.
Just that moment when they cut to the bedroom, it's beautifully shot. I mean, and it's got so much more class than something like Orange is the Blue color, lesbian color of blue, whatever the fuck that movie's called, which is just like
blue is the warmest color.
Blue is the warmest color, which is exploiting these poor actresses.
I thought you were talking about Orange is the New Black.
I get them confused.
Like prison rape?
Lesbians in France, lesbians in prison. Sorry.
Yeah.
Well, there's not everyone's talking about the hunger on a daily basis, but if there was any controversy, it's that the studio mandated a reshoot for the ending, and I don't even know if you knew that they did that, but you asked me like, hey, what's up with this ending? Because it doesn't make any sense, really. But it doesn't need to, I guess. Like, I don't know. I would have liked it if it wasn't there, but you needed to have something. You needed to have a perspective still there, I guess.
Yeah.
I just quickly, we'll go back and forth on Scott as a filmmaker, because he's literally been making movies pretty much since we have been born. And his movies hit me so hard in different points of my life. And different points, they inspired me for different reasons. Like Top Gun is that one that said, holy shit, like I want to make this thing. And then, there was other great movies for a while, but then it was True Romance, where I'm like, oh my God, like this is the best movie I've ever seen, And then he did it a couple of other times later on, but more just from like, oh, it's so good to see him back in like Crimson Tide was another there's a Hans Zimmer score that's badass. That's one of those movies where it's like, God, that shouldn't have worked. It was billed as an action movie, but it's not. It's just an intense movie. Like, so he's like you were talking about with Ridley. For me, like Tony, as his career shifted and moved, he had just such powerhouse films that came out that spoke to me in such different ways. And I loved it that one was when I was 9 and one was when I was 16 and the one was when I was like 18 or 17, like all these different points in my life to inspire me, to keep me wanting to do movies. Where some people, I want to be a filmmaker when I'm a little kid. Then I want to be a fireman. And then I want to be a train conductor. He's one of those guys that always prompted me up to go, oh yeah, I still do want to do that,
I think I was telling you during the summer for Tony, for me, when I think about his movies, especially like his 80s and early 90s movies, which I feel are a lot of his strongest films, I feel like he makes me think of the summer. He's like, his films make me think of a good time during the summer. Not that they all take place then. Some of it comes down to his orange lighting aesthetic that he likes, his warm tones that he brings to so many movies. But I just feel like, a lot of his action movies from the 80s and early 90s are just that like good time summer action flick. But they're elevated. Almost all of his action movies aren't just your standard action fare. Like he really does bring something special to the way he shoots his action. He brings great characters to the screen. I love Tony's work. I feel like one of the differences that I see between Ridley and Tony, when I think of Tony's movies, I think he captures a mood really well, whatever the mood he's going for, a la The Hunger, is so stylistic and moody. Whereas like Ridley kind of captures a time better. And he goes for it more. Like Tony, I don't think if I think about it, did Tony ever even do like a true period piece? I don't think he did. He stays very contemporary. So Ridley stands out as being able to kind of capture that time really well, but I think Tony stands out as capturing a mood really well in every movie.
Yeah.
And that's why in some of his later films where, as I was saying, I think Man on Fire is where he found that new style that he liked with kind of quicker cutting and, just different look of the lenses he's using and just kind of the different style to his cinematography that he wasn't using earlier in his career. Even I think some of the warm tones disappear. Am I right about that? Did he?
It got much grittier.
Yeah,
warm tones disappeared for a sharper, grittier feel.
Both these filmmakers are dependent on how good a screenplay can be, and those later films in Tony's career suffered from their screenplays.
I think Domino is his worst movie. I find it almost unwatchable. So for someone who I consider one of my top 3-4 directors of all time, I do not like that movie. It's just a slog.
I wasn't willing to rewatch it for this.
It's a big mess. Yeah, and then Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3. It's like, I just don't know why that was remade. It was competent, but it wasn't. I love that he ended his career ended on not a great but a solid note with Unstoppable, because say what you want about the movie, it's just got really 2 good performances. It's not violent, but it's action packed and it's intense, and it's got so many practical stunts and effects work in it. I just had a blast watching Unstoppable, and I'm glad that was his final over Pelham 1, 2, 3. He does not write his stuff, and there's been a lot of writers. Shane Black was one. Shane Black's The Last Boy Scout was on the Hollywood blacklist as one of the best scripts. It's one of the most expensive scripts ever bought, and it wasn't Tony Scott that destroyed it. It was the studio that destroyed it. Shane Black has even said that. And then you have Tarantino. Tarantino should not like somebody directing his movies, but he loved Tony Scott and what he did. God, what freaking Quentin Tarantino and Tony Scott making a movie together. How, of course, you get true romance out of that,
Much like Quentin Tarantino has his foot fetish that seems to make it on screen all the time. I do think Tony had a little bit of a thing for women with short hair. If you look over his career, he has characters with short hair.
So often, more often than not, he showcases such a fuckload of violence, and that his films always seem to have so much heart at the center, with the exception of, like I said, something like Domino. The Hunger doesn't exactly show that. I mean, it does, but in a different way, and because that movie's so stylistic and he's learning the craft more, I still think he gets away with a lot of that, and it really does. It shows more emotion. I'll put it that way. But we see his filmmaking in every single thing he's done, all the way up until when he died. Don't do it. Yeah, and then on August 19th of 2012, midnight or 12:30 p.m. He jumped off the Vincent Thomas Bridge in San Pedro. And there's a lot of speculation that he had cancer. I don't want to speculate because I want to honor him, not talk about it as something that I want to speak out of turn. And because that stuff doesn't matter. Obviously something was wrong. I like to think he was not happy with the state of films. So some people have speculated on that, but it was really hard to hear that news. He was cremated, and his ashes were spread Hollywood Forever Cemetery on 24th of August in LA. And I thought it was really great. Tom Cruise, Christian Slater, Val Kilmer, Eddie Murphy, Denzel Washington, Gene Hackman, Keira Knightley, tons of people came out and gave him a wonderful tribute. He's definitely a filmmaker I miss. 8 years, almost 9 years that we haven't had a Tony Scott movie, but we have so many gems that I'm never sick of Tony Scott movies.
Tony will be missed, has been missed for a long time now. I think you pointed out, you thought, if we didn't lose Tony, he probably would have been at some point maybe working on something like a comic book movie. You thought he'd be a wonderful fit for a movie like this, the Flash movie, which I could agree with you. I would have loved to see a Tony Scott, anything Tony Scott comic book would have been an interesting approach.
So real quick, this might be an easy answer, but favorite Ridley film?
Alien would be my favorite, but Gladiator, I wouldn't say Gladiator is like on its heels, but I love Gladiator.
I'd go Alien, and then probably Matchstick Men. I love that movie.
Oh, wow.
Favorite Tony Scott movie?
My favorite Tony Scott would be The Hunger. No, True Romance, I think.
For sure. 100%.
True Romance, and then probably Crimson Tide, maybe?
Same here. Exact order. And then Man on Fire, probably. And again, those are the ones where I'm like, those are the ones that lifted my spirits at different parts of my life, you know?
Yeah.
Those are some masterpieces, in my opinion, especially
Yeah.
True Romance.
I got to agree with you on those.
Well, there you have it, folks. Anything else you want to throw in there, John?
Nope, nothing
This
else.
was a fun one. This got a little hard at the end, a little choky. It's, I mean, I know it's been a
Understandable.
while and stuff like that, but when
Well,
you
I did want to
reflect on
point
it,
out, look at this guy. He's so many of these pictures. I look at him on the internet. He has this wonderful smile. He just seemed to have like this bright spirit in him. It's sad to know how things ended up for him, but in so many of the pictures, if you look him up online, he's got this beaming smile.
This is a good one. Scott Free Brothers. So cool. Glad we got to do this one. On this episode of First of the Best, I selected Wes Anderson's first film from 1996, Bottle Rocket.
And I selected Paul Thomas Anderson's first film from also 1996, Hard Eight.
Let's, point out the obvious, John. We selected these two. Yes, because they're both pretty great filmmakers with great aesthetics, but they're both Andersons. So it just made sense.
Not related, though.
Not related, no.
I think they have some similarities. They have similarities to some of the aesthetics in their films, but they I think their storytelling is very different, and the I guess the subject matters are very different.
When you and I were watching Hard Eight, we were talking about how, God, P.T. Anderson really knows how to make movies where you just don't know where they're going. And now that I think about it, that's pretty much the epitome of a Wes Anderson movie. You don't, Life Aquatic, where is this movie going? And Bottle Rocket's the same thing.
They're both not plot driven, I would say. I mean, doesn't mean there isn't a plot of some sort in their films, but they're definitely character driven, character studies. But yeah, they're not strong on plot, and that helps with you not necessarily knowing or being formulaic in any way where you're like, well, I can see where this is probably headed. Yeah.
And we're going to start with the one that came out just a little bit beforehand, Wes Anderson's Bottle Rocket. I don't know how many people watching this have seen it or even know about it. I have talked to people that have not heard of this Wes Anderson movie, because a lot of people think Royal Tenenbaums was the first. A lot of people think Rushmore was the first. It works that way sometimes when things get buried. Sure. And then, people like us, we like to go, well, I remember hearing about him, in 96. I didn't see Bottle Rocket when it first came out, but I remember people talking about it and seeing his little speech on the MTV Movie Awards, where he told the little story that James Caan is the one that made the movie make sense from the title, because they had said, he goes, why is this movie called Bottle Rocket? And Wes told him, he goes, well, we just thought it sounded cool. And then James Caan said, to me it makes sense because it's something big that starts out small, like a small idea that starts out big, and then they go, wow, yeah, okay, that's why it's called Bottle Rockets. I always thought that was kind of a little interesting. Like, I love Wes Anderson. I don't think that every one of his movies is a perfect hit. Like, most of them are, but like, there's a couple. Darjeeling for me is one that kind of stands out. But for the most part, they're full of heart. They make me feel good. It shows how that spirit, like, because he's got this like symmetry, and like he's very eccentric, and he's got this distinctive visual style, narrative style. A lot of people cited him as like the modern day example of a true auteur, because he does hold a visual style and editing style, a quirkiness to every single thing he does, no matter what period piece, Grand Budapest or Royal Tenenbaums, which is like this weird fantasy fictional, like New York City, like all that stuff has that aesthetic to it. And that's why I appreciate him so much. They are all sort of edited in that style with the Mark Allen Mother Spa sort of like soundtrack to them. Doop, 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 doop. But I think he's very aware of like, you know, a good example is Life Aquatic when, you know, spoilers, the movie's 17 years old, but when they kill off Ned and you're just like, you're sad, and the movie goes sad from there, and it just happens out of the blue where you think the movie's kind of already over. And like, yeah, I think he did that in Grand Budapest. You're like, the movie's over, but then they give you one more scene and Gustav is killed, you know, like, I mean, off screen, but they talk about it. And it's like, he loves landing those gut punches. Richie Tannenbaum slicing his wrists out of the blue. Like, he loves doing that kind of stuff. And I think he's very aware that like it shifts the movie more dramatically, you know? So we'll get into Bottle Rocket. And rewatching this one, John, because it'd been a while for me, but it hadn't been that long. I think I saw it a couple years back, but watching it again and just focusing on it and taking notes, I forgot like how many like he has the same kind of sensibilities, a lot of the same musical cues and stuff that he would use later. And I kind of remembered this one not doing that. Obviously this one had like a smaller budget, so lots of the musical numbers are just, they're not like, he's not using Rolling Stones and Beatles yet at that point in his career, because those are hard to license. But it was fun to see that, like, that forward narrative editing that they use, where they're talking about a scene and then someone closes a car door and then shows up at that scene, and it's pushing this like kind of goofy narrative along really quickly. Anderson thrusts you into this story where you meet these characters and they're all just sort of losers for their own. They're almost like living in like a Napoleon Dynamite type world where things are just kind of spinning in this weird, timeless environment. And Owen Wilson is like kind of self-proclaimed this like leader of, you know, them wanting to get into a life of crime, and they just think it's the coolest thing in the world. They haven't actually done anything yet, and he basically holds interviews with his friends to see who's going to be part of this gang. And they're gonna rob, I guess, a bookstore. You know, like, and it starts out so fast where you're already, you know, you're learning as they're talking about what they've already established. So it's not like the movie starts and then someone comes up with this idea. They're already kind of full speed ahead, wanting to go rob this bookstore because they wanted to get in the good graces of James Caan's character, who I can't remember the name of the guy. I should. So they rob this bookstore and they just think they're awesome after that. And then they end up having to sort of go on the run, which I don't think they really needed to, but they just do, because the whole movie is about them. It's like they're children, where they're having that adventure at the park. You know, like, oh god, we better go on the lam and spend all the money on a hotel that we.
That's just funny that you say that, because that's how I looked at it too. Especially like early on when you have Owen Wilson's character showing the plan that he's already come up with, and he has all these drawings and these notes in his notebook or whatever. And it's like, yeah, it's stuff that a kid draws in class when they're avoiding paying attention to the lesson, and they're coming up with what they're going to do in their fort in the woods later that afternoon with their buddies or whatever. And
exactly,
yeah, so you have kind of that childlike exuberance coming from especially Owen Wilson's character, but Luke Wilson plays into it, you know, like allows him to live out those fantasies even when he knows like this is silly. Like at times, he's one of my favorite parts of the film is his story and where it takes you. And while they're on this adventure or on the lam, on the run, you know, he kind of meets somebody and starts having this relationship, and he could care less about what Owen Wilson wants to do to prepare for the plan. They're like, we need to get haircuts and this and that. And he's like, yeah, you know, let me know how it goes or whatever. So yeah, that energy that comes through the characters, the childlike exuberance of being on this adventure or whatever. I enjoy that stuff.
Oh yeah. My favorite line in the movie is, "He's out, you're out too. I don't think I'm in. No gang."
He's out. You're out too. And I don't think I'm in either. No gang.
It fit right in there with a lot of Wes Anderson's films that I admire them. I love his unique style that he brings to cinema, but his humor doesn't always connect for me. I was kind of actually annoyed with Owen Wilson's stupidity, even though I get it where it's coming from that kind of childlike place. It's weird because I've grown accustomed to Owen Wilson over the years, so I know what to expect from his style. but this character kind of rubs me the wrong way a little bit.
Yeah. He can easily, Owen Wilson's performances can easily fall into that like Vince Vaughn thing where it's like you either get on board with it right away and it doesn't annoy you, or like you're annoyed the whole time. You know, it's really two camps. The movie does veer in different directions, like we were talking about with both of these directors. Like, you know, after this heist at the beginning, they just go and they spend the second act of this movie in a hotel where Luke Wilson meets, I think her name was Ursula, who's just like, played by the cutest, most pleasant, cutest chick ever. I love that. I love her.
I'm glad you say that, because I kind of wanted to point out how like just her looks, her cute kind of homely looks or whatever work so well in the context of the story and their little love story. For those who aren't aware of what we're talking about here, Luke Wilson's character falls in love with a maid at the hotel that they're staying at, and just kind of follows her around as she does her daily chores. And it's just the cutest thing. Like they have the language barrier. She doesn't speak English, but they still only take about a day for them to kind of make this strong connection, and you believe it.
Absolutely believe it.
Really well. But her looks, she's not some kind of like model or stunning, you know, Angelina Jolie style actress or anything, but her looks go a long way to make it believable, the connection that they make in that short time, and just the looks that she gives him. It's all about these facial expressions the two share over this short time period where they're not able to really talk out their feelings. It's great.
Yeah.
My favorite part of the film, for sure.
Me too. Like that relationship, that little plot, that's probably the most Wes Anderson in the movie. Like that's a Wes Anderson situation that he would create and possibly make a full movie out of, you know, which he kind of did. But I don't think I'd ever had that fantasy to that point. Like, oh, the maid, like I'm gonna like charm the pants off the maid, literally. And when you watch the movie, like it's very engaging when he's just hanging out with her. And because it seems realistic. It's like you technically could just go and friend somebody that's doing their job at the hotel if you chose to do it, and then fall in love with them. You know, I've had relationships where the language was a problem too. You know, like so I love that stuff, and that's my favorite stuff in the movie too. It's more of sort of there is funny things in there, like the montage of him following her around and helping her with the laundry and helping her make the bed, and then meeting the other workers and all having margaritas. Like it's just cute and fun, and that's really what I want to get to, is like, because you have your heist stuff, and that was the big thing in the 90s. It's like, oh, we gotta have these screwballs doing a heist and it's gonna go wrong. So that's Wes Anderson's like outside influences, but the stuff that's great and that makes you feel like the rest of his career went more in that direction is that stuff with Ursula in the hotel.
James Caan in your first film as like the draw kind of to bring people in.
Sure.
Then you get Bill Murray in your second film, and then you get Gene Hackman in your third film. I mean, he was really racking up these legends to some degree in his first couple films. It's pretty impressive.
Oh God, yeah. You look at the cast of Tannenbaums. It's, I mean, Angelica Houston, Danny Glover. It's just full of
that. Seems to be
Gwyneth
the film
Paltrow.
that he has continued to draw from that cast in every film after. For the most part, it's like once he got to Royal Tenenbaums, and I think you've said this before, that's the film where he finally became the Wes Anderson that we all know and love at this point.
I forgot how many shots in Bottle Rocket like subliminally gave birth to a lot of stuff you would use later. And like that's what the sort of the point of our show is, talking about this stuff, is like what worked and what didn't work in that first movie. And like, though it's toned down a lot because I think he was trying things out in Bottle Rocket, he couldn't create that whimsical fantasy like world of whatever location that they're in, because it always feels like it's not it feels like it's like a parallel universe to wherever they're at, you know. Like The Life Aquatic is the biggest fantasy ever, that oceanographers or whatever are these like superheroes, you know, they're like mythological. It's and he couldn't do that with Bottle Rocket, so it doesn't pop visually like the other ones do because he's just shooting in regular locations. I still think the camera work is nice, but it didn't focus as much on those details, you know. But you could tell he was learning those techniques and stuff. So,
but I did notice, you know, now we're all very familiar with his kind of whip pans that he uses over and over in his films, and the symmetric, symmetry that he brings to his films. And that's the one that you don't see as much, the symmetry in this first film, but he still has a number of kind of the camera moves that you have grown to expect from his style. And like other like close cutaways, like I want to say when they introduce the maid character, it's like these cutaways of what she has on her cart really quick. And I feel like those are things you've seen in later films of his where he introduces a character or whatever and kind of uses these close-ups to help do that. And his editing style and shooting style certainly was apparent in this film. It's just, I think the budget constraints kept him from, as you said, kind of creating that full-out fantasy world.
Yeah. And this whole movie was shot in Fort Worth, Texas, which is probably why, again, it has a completely different color palette than the rest of the stuff. It's brighter. Fun fact, Bill Murray was actually the one they wanted to play Mr. Henry before James Caan came along. Makes sense now that you think about it, but I think for that role, they picked the right person. Or this was the only Wes Anderson movie where he did not collaborate with Randall Poster, who is the guy he's one of the biggest music supervisors in Hollywood. So he's the kind of music supervisor that when the script is being conceptualized, where it's just being written as a treatment, he's involved in that process. That's how important music is to Wes Anderson when he's making movies. So his music supervisor is that crucial to the whole development in the pre-production. And I personally find that fascinating because if I was some big name director or something like that, I would have the same type of stuff he has that Tarantino has, where music plays such a key role in how things are seen and how things are felt. So I love it that he has that with Randall Poster ever since, I want to say, Rushmore. But it's interesting. Well, obviously he didn't have it with this one because he was a student filmmaker pretty much. He was a brand new guy, so you don't have those pieces yet. So, but I really do. I think, again, I forgot how much that stuff reminds me of his later work. In Bottle Rocket, it still has cool musical cues that fit really well. When the heist is going awry at the end and Owen Wilson's fumbling around and they're just screwing everything up and shooting themselves, the musical cue in there is perfect. And that's kind of what fuels some of the laughter for me in those scenes. But
what are you doing here? You're always at lunch now. Not always. Yes, always.
Doing this rewatch for First of the Best, because I love Anderson's style. I really respect and appreciate how he sticks to his aesthetic, and he's fine with his haters because the people that like his movies. I love that he's got such an amazing relationship with Fox Searchlight. Like, they love him. He gives them so much cred, and they give him the money that he needs. He's one of the most prolific directors with the budget they give him. He usually comes in under budget, ahead of schedule, and makes them profit, which is usually, they say, I want to say 4 times what your budget is when you actually start making money. And he does that for them. And so they continue to trust him. And that's a fantastic thing, especially, when your career gets going and like, you think you've reached the pinnacle of it, and then you come out with Grand Budapest and it has this international appeal and ends up being his most successful movie to date and getting, I think, like 10 Oscar nominations or 7 or 8 or something. Of course, he's one of our guys. Of course, we'll give him $25 million to make a movie that looks like it costs $70 million, and it also gets people Oscar nominations for acting when they work with him, So, and Bottle Rocket was the infancy of that. And I can see why he is who he is from Bottle Rocket. I really can, more so than I thought I was going into this. So
he's a filmmaker that needed to grow on me. In fact, his first 3 films are not films that I still have a strong connection to. I think Rushmore is actually my favorite of those first 3. But then once he got to Life Aquatic, I've pretty much loved almost everything he's done except for the Darjeeling Unlimited or whatever. And really, once we got to Tenenbaums and Life Aquatic, I think his voice was very well understood by film goers, and everything he's done, very unique stuff since then, but it still all fits within kind of the mold we've seen him create for himself.
But yeah, go see Bottle Rocket if you like Wes Anderson movies and you didn't even know this one existed, or even if you did and you just didn't check it out. Check it out. It's pretty interesting. If anything, the love story with the Ursulas, it's very warm and engaging.
Okay, hard cut to Hard 8. Now we're going to talk about Paul Thomas Anderson's first feature, which is Hard Eight. Originally, he wanted it to be called Sydney, and it was based off of a short film that he made when he was like in his early 20s. He did get some known actors involved in the short that helped kind of get it seen by other people within the studio and stuff like that. Philip Baker Hall was in the original short film. It was called Coffee and Cigarettes. So it got some acclaim, I believe, at like Sundance, which got him into some type of Sundance film program where they helped him raise the funds and craft the short into a full-length feature. So by about 94, he was working on the actual feature version of his short, calling it Sydney. He turned in a 2.5-hour cut of the film. The studio hated it, felt it needed to be cut, took it out of his hands, made a version that was crappy, I guess. So it took like 2 years for him and the studio to get on the same page and let him actually edit it into a version that got a release. So it wasn't until 96 that it finally was released, and only in a few theaters. It got some critical acclaim, but it certainly wasn't a film that many people got a chance to see at the time. And I think, it had to take the success of Boogie Nights for him to get the name that got people looking back and searching out that first feature. And now I think a lot of people, if they're not familiar with it, at least if they ever discover it, realize, yes, this truly is a great place to start with the Paul Thomas Anderson filmography. I think he had a great film right out of the gate. I really love Hard Eight.
And we forgot to mention Bottle Rocket technically, I guess, was based on a short that Wes Anderson did too. So it's interesting that both of these first films were years before based on short films.
Hard Eight is kind of a crime story. It's the tale of a aging gambler, kind of hitman gangster style character, Philip Baker Hall, who wants to make amends for his past, which we don't get to know until later in the story, but he wants to make amends with his past and help out kind of a lonely loser played by John C. Reilly that he finds at a cafe. That's where the film picks up. Much like films of that era that gained popularity because of Quentin Tarantino in the mid 90s, it's a film filled with just a lot of dialogue scenes, character study mainly, light on what you would call action, but the film is still very intense at times. Kind of keeps you on the edge of your seat, even though it's not a film that comes with a ton of violence, but there is some in the film. It is a crime story. Great cast. Philip Baker Hall and John C. Reilly are the main leads, and this kind of father-son relationship that grows out of this chance meeting, or this, maybe not a chance meeting, but this meeting where Philip Baker Hall decides to show John C. Reilly the ropes in the casino world on how to make just a couple $100 last all day, and kind of show the casino that you're there spending money, and then they start comping you. So he kind of shows them the tricks on how to game the system at the casinos. And then it jumps forward 2 years, and you start to see this blossoming relationship between John C. Reilly and Gwyneth Paltrow's character, who's a cocktail waitress and sometimes prostitute on the side. And they start their relationship. And then you've got Samuel L. Jackson, who befriends John C. Reilly's character, and the two of them, you could tell there might be something criminal going on between the two of them, and kind of got to see where these four lives are going to intersect, and where the crime element of the story kind of comes into play later in the film. But everyone's great performances by all, almost Oscar worthy by most of them. Samuel L. Jackson is very much a Samuel L. Jackson character, but we love him for playing those characters. I mean, he's awesome in this movie. And then the one other person I want to mention cast wise is why am I blanking on his name right now?
Are you talking about Philip Seymour Hoffman?
Yes. I can want to say Philip Baker Hall. Philip Seymour Hoffman has a cameo, but you will God. It is a great standout moment in the film.
No, I think it's one of my favorite Paul Thomas Anderson movies, to be honest with you. And I'll be honest with everybody watching, I just saw it for the first time with you. I didn't know this movie existed, which is what I love about this show. I call myself a movie buff, and I had not seen Paul Thomas Anderson's first movie. It just slipped through the cracks. but I enjoyed
sometimes it's not an easy one to seek out.
I enjoyed the hell out of it, though. It's definitely one of his easiest to digest films. Like, it's very linear based, and even though the story goes in weird directions, I mean, once you get to that hotel room, you're like, what is happening? What is going on with this movie? You know, when the situation, the hotel is happening, it's just like, but I love that stuff because it's got you kind of like short of breath, but not because there's some crazy action happening. It's because what is going to happen to these people? And I agree with you. The cast of this movie is so good. Like, you got the super young John C. Reilly, the super young, super hot Gwyneth Paltrow. You got Samuel L., I'm guessing, fresh off of Pulp Fiction when they shot it. But he's a classic Samuel L. Jackson character, but he also is a little bit more subtle, a little bit calmer. He's got come on, man. Yo, baby, show me that pussy. Show me that pussy. It's like, did he write that or did they write that knowing it was Samuel L. Jackson? Yeah. You got to remember the time, like, both of these movies were made, we're doing, this show, I think, has got the two movies we're talking about the closest together in time, I think. And it's interesting that where these guys' careers went and what's going on in the 90s at the time that these two look at what Paul Thomas Anderson went on to do. Like, Hard Eight came out again, same time with Bottle Rocket, where you had that Tarantino craze. So it kind of feels like it's more like that. And this movie, Hard Eight, is so, I don't want to say mellow, but it's just like telling a kind of a quiet story, just letting it unfold.
I think it's filled with like a lot of quiet tension. Like it does keep you kind of on the edge of your seat. You're tense for most of the viewing experience, but it's kind of an understated amount of tension. And I think he's mastered that across all of his films. Most of his films, not to say there aren't life and death stakes in many of his films, but that's not always what the tension is being built off of, is someone's life hanging in the balance. It's just these quiet character moments, and what decision will somebody make, or how will their decision play out for somebody else in the film, and that has you on the edge of your seat. And
yeah,
I feel like he's kind of like a melancholy Tarantino. He's not. Tarantino brings like this upbeat energy and excitement and vibrance to his films, and they're filled with violence and life and death stakes. Whereas you get a lot of that in Paul Thomas Anderson's films, but they're not as violent, not as life and death, not as over the top. It's this kind of subtle, melancholy kind of tension, and there's still excitement in the films, but it's subdued.
The melancholy Tarantino is like a brilliant description of Paul Thomas Anderson. Really, really, really is. You talked about, which may be one of the best cameos of all time, but it wasn't really a cameo. It was just a part for an actor that wasn't anybody yet. Philip Seymour Hoffman just literally taking what you can tell was almost little to no dialogue, and just be an obnoxious guy, like watching him at work in his young career, just take that role and chew the fuck out of it for like 2 or 3 minutes was so amazing.
Both of these Anderson guys have helped launch many people's careers, who are still working today, who are well-respected actors that started out in the early days in their films and are still working with them to this date. So I love both these directors for the way that they've kind of crafted this group of actors that they keep coming back to. I love that with many directors. I mean, James Cameron had a lot of actors that he would bring back from film to film, and it makes their world that much more of an interesting little microcosm of I really appreciate that when a director can keep bringing the same actors back but create new characters and new cinematic lives for them. Basically, like, each character is a chance to have a new spot in cinema history, crafting these memorable characters. And I think both these directors do that over and over, even though they're using the same actor. They're always able to kind of create something new, using that something new out of something old. I don't know. It's always an interesting approach.
Well, I would say P.T. Anderson, Wes Anderson, Tarantino, like, the thing I love about them using what Samuel L. Jackson calls the team players, like the Tarantino players, like, is like, because from movie to movie, you never know
how significant of a role is this character going to have? When in the last movie, they were the main character. Like, I love watching that in Wes Anderson movies where Bill Murray's in 2 minutes of one and then he's the lead in the next, and they circulate these actors, and P.T. Anderson does the same thing too. Like, I mean, eventually Philip Seymour Hoffman graduated to leading role status with stuff like The Master, and that's incredible, going from a cameo or a minute long scene in this to smaller roles and then getting bigger and bigger and then leading The Master pretty much. Like, that's extraordinary. And when you can turn an actor like Philip Seymour Hoffman, let's call him like a Steve Buscemi, or like a Paul Giamatti, like just kind of like non-traditional stars.
Yeah, someone without leading man good looks.
Yeah. Like, and when you can do that, that says a lot about your direction, I think, too. So
yeah. But speaking of his characters, Paul Thomas Anderson, he always focuses on kind of lonely, kind of sad sack kind of characters, I feel like, or many of his films, especially in his early first 4 films. That this one, Hard 8, is no different. John C. Reilly fits the description perfectly of characters that you've come to love from him, whether it's Mark Wahlberg's character and so many people in Boogie Nights. Almost everybody in Magnolia has that kind of effect.
He definitely got the best performance out of Marky Mark, to me, to date in Boogie Nights. I don't think there's even close to anything as good as that.
Maybe people are setting off the plants?
No, not really. And also kind of the same, I would say, for Adam Sandler. I mean, I know he's tried a couple other more serious style roles, but if you really look at his probably best dramatic performance, even though it still has the comedy going on a bit, Punch Drunk Love is amazing. That's Adam Sandler in the lead role there, and how compelling of a film and a character he is when it's, Donkey Boy or whatever the fuck this guy's name.
Because that was the height of the Sandler songs, where anything he touched made $500 million, even if it was a complete piece of shit. So for him to go and do something like that, and for P.T. Anderson to get that performance out of him was pretty great. I actually love that movie. So.
Well, other things that I'd say show up in Hard 8 that you see in a lot of other Paul Thomas Anderson films later, he focuses on the theme of the family a lot, the family unit, and even to some degree father figures, I think, are used a lot in his films. Definitely the family unit is an important part of Boogie Nights. You got the father and son kind of connection in films right there, like Hard 8 and There Will Be Blood. I think it's something that he's kind of focused on many times, is that just knowing like the connection you have with your family is far more important than fame and fortune and what the desires that's on the surface for the character, what you think that they want or what everyone thinks they want out of life. I think his films show that really it's more about the personal connections and the family connections, even if it's not your real family. I mean, even in that image right there, neither one of those are actual father and son. I think that's something that was apparent in this first film that has traveled through with all of his films. Yeah, he just crafts really complex character studies that I find to be really interesting. As we said, they're not really plot driven, but I'm always compelled to follow this character all the way to the end of their story. Grabs you and keeps you interested, even if they're slow paced, slow moving. You don't know where the story's going. Even scenes can be drawn out to be these really long, exaggerated moments that you're like, when is this going to end? What is really the purpose? Sometimes it takes 2 viewings to fully grasp what was going on throughout the whole thing, but they're always very rewarding films for me. I feel like almost every film he's made has been top tier, best picture quality for me, except for Inherent Vice.
It definitely has the stamp of someone who's going to go on and win Oscars, 100%. And where his career went, like he's such a profoundly interesting director because you don't know what he's going to make from one thing to the next. Everything's sort of drastically different from one another. I guess you could say companion pieces would maybe be Boogie Nights and Magnolia, because they were back to back and they have a similar editing style to them that keeps them sort of, I don't know, like fast paced. They're very different movies, but
and
there's
so many of the actors, even though he's used a lot of actors across films, those two really do have like similar casts.
Yeah.
They feel like companion pieces.
And I feel like There Will Be Blood is what slowed him down, and he really started exploring new types of techniques that he would almost even like revolutionize, when he did the risks he would take in movies like that to make it as gorgeous and like golden era as it looks. And then obviously I'm a huge fan of The Master. I guess it was controversial. Like some people didn't like it, some people did. I loved The Master. I thought it got the two best performances of the year out that year. Maybe even three. Amy Adams was great too. These guys are creating their craft and just learning how to make a film, and that which is hard enough to do as it is. That's why it takes you several movies to get what you would later call maybe your look or aesthetic or whatever. But out of all his movies, because you've seen them all, which is the one where you think you see the most Hard Eight in?
Well, probably the first two, Boogie Nights and Magnolia. He was still
that's what I was going to say.
From that same framework here with Hard Eight. It's just again budgetary constraints and things of that nature keep it a smaller film, a bit more contained than what later films are able to be. They're more ambitious. He kind of came out of the gate as a fully formed filmmaker, in my opinion. Like this film feels like it has everything you want from a Paul Thomas Anderson movie. And even though it's a small independent film, mid-90s independent film, it's telling a small story, so it doesn't feel like it's working under where, it could be bigger if it wanted to be. It doesn't need to be. It tells the story it wanted to tell. Both of these filmmakers, again, both Andersons, have moments in their film where the camera draws attention to itself in the way that the whip pans, or with Paul Thomas Anderson, he has a lot of push in or dolly into a shot or dolly out to some degree. And the speed at which he does that kind of feels unnatural to where it draws attention to itself. And so many times when I see that in a film, especially if they only do it like once or twice and it really stands out and you're like, that took me out of the movie. It annoyed me. I don't like their camera work because you're aware of, like, you feel the cameraman on set because it draws attention to itself.
Yeah.
Both of these filmmakers do it and have ingrained it into their style in such a way that it draws attention to itself, but doesn't take you out of the movie. It informs the story. It's the camera work is playing into character development or storytelling in a way where it still keeps you compelled and interested, and not have that momentary, I'm out of the film for a second because I'm paying attention to their camera work.
It's like a really well-crafted transition from one scene to the next. You know, someone is putting that together. Someone's editing that. Someone's creating that. It's not natural to have a transition because it takes you out of the story. But sometimes it works in the context of the movie so well that, like, you're right, it doesn't take you out. Wes is a great example of his whip pans because it's never forced. It's always to support something happening. So it doesn't take you out, even if you, especially a casual viewer, they don't even know what they're seeing. Like, you and I will look at it and go, yep, there they go. They're doing it again. But no, it's like a well-crafted transition. It's the same type of thing. You're supposed to not draw attention to yourself, but sometimes when you do, as long as it's good, then it still works,
The similarities, or are these filmmakers really that similar or not? And I feel like that's definitely one of the areas they have their distinctive camera work that can be draw attention to itself, but works so well with their style. And then their production design, as we've pointed on many times about Wes Anderson, how it's one of the key things that tells you you're watching a Wes Anderson movie. I think Paul Thomas Anderson's production design is pretty amazing as well, but it's not as showy. Obviously, it's not creating kind of a fantasy world. It's more of a real lived-in world. But if you think of all the different stories he's told and the different time periods that he's brought to the screen, it's pretty diverse, and they've all had kind of a similar feel within different time periods, but still you can kind of look at it and go, that feels very much like a Paul Thomas Anderson.
Oh yeah. Well, he'll have sort of ugly locations, but it's the texturized nature of the lighting and the film that makes, like, There Will Be Blood is a good example of that, like ugly, gross oil fields, but he just makes them look fucking epic and beautiful,
dust and dirt, and it's a beautiful, beautiful film.
He does that great job, because the first movie I ever saw of his was Boogie Nights, and there's a conversation that John C. Reilly has with Marky Mark out by the pool. He's like, "Can I make you margarita? Hey, do you know karate?" Where that whole thing, you're like, I'm understanding this guy's character right now, and that he's gonna end up being Dirk's sidekick, and I love when P.T. Anderson does, and he does that a lot in Hard Eight, where it's just these side conversations to explain where someone's head is at, or explain that they're just not the brightest person in the world, but we're following this person.
Do you think that scene in Boogie Nights where the two of them meet and have that conversation was like the impetus for Step Brothers? Because it just
Deal. You have to call me Dragon.
This is something I wanted to quickly ask you with both filmmakers. Like, what is your favorite film? We can maybe talk about what our least favorite is as well. Usually that's the ones we haven't seen or only watched once. But I'd say Boogie Nights is still my favorite. And so it is kind of like this high watermark early in his career that he hasn't quite gotten back to. But I think almost every film he's made since then is just a tiny bit below it. It's not like he has this one that's so high on the mountain that the others can't quite get there, because I seriously love There Will Be Blood. Boogie Nights is my favorite of his. Inherent Vice is my least favorite. What would you go with for your favorites?
Boogie Nights is my favorite. Yeah. It's definitely followed by Punch Drunk Love. And then before it would be Magnolia, but I might like Hard Eight more than Magnolia.
Okay. What's your favorite and least favorite of Wes Anderson?
Least favorite is Darjeeling Limited, and I always say it wrong. Darjeeling, yeah, you know which one I'm talking about. I have a very difficult time with this question because I have two separate categories. I have Life Aquatic and Royal Tenenbaums tied as my favorite, and then as my second favorite, I have Moonrise Kingdom and Grand Budapest tied. Yeah. Just the tiniest edge to Tannenbaum's, and I know you disagree with that because it's not as inventive or as original or as unique as something like Life Aquatic, and I don't like Life Aquatic any less. I get the feels when I watch Tannenbaum's. It just hits me in all those right spots, which is interesting that you're not a fan of that movie because it's such an important movie to me. It's in my top 20 of all time. Like, I just love that movie so much. They're subtle jokes. They like, Daddy, why wasn't I invited to Grandma's birthday? Well, she wasn't your real grandma. I didn't think you'd have any interest in that.
I actually would say I kind of have two films as well that I want to pick for my favorite of his, because they're both, I'd say, the funniest, at least for me, the ones that I could truly say are comedies that I laugh at. But Life Aquatic, definitely the funniest one.
It's his funniest movie.
But there's something about Moonrise Kingdom for me that is like a more polished feature, maybe even more of a compelling story. Like, there's the character of Steve Zissou is more compelling and interesting, but the journey that you take with the little kids and the parents surrounding them who are searching for them in Moonrise Kingdom is almost more rewarding journey, I guess, as a story. So I kind of almost lean towards Moonrise Kingdom as my favorite of his, but it's hard not to say that Steve Zissou as a character and all the quirkiness of that film, that was the first Wes Anderson film that I truly got on board and enjoyed and was like, oh boy, Wes Anderson, a filmmaker now that I'm really interested to see his next work. Before that,
your red cap and a Speedo. I'm hanging on to my seat for the French Dispatch because it's just been pushed so many times and they've been so adamant. And Wes Anderson's done such a great job of going, please do not put this out on streaming. Because last thing I'll say about Anderson is a lot of, and I said this on someone else's show once too, when we were talking about Grand Budapest Hotel, and a lot of people think that because he's more of like an indie darling that his stuff is okay to just watch on a regular television stuff. No, and if anything, his movies are so crafted and detailed, and the way the sets are built and the way they use so much forced perspective to make things look bigger, and he still uses matte paintings, and there's so much color in his movies. If anything, I would say his movies, almost as much as your blockbusters, need to be seen on the big screen to really get the effect of them. So I'm glad he stuck to his guns and fought really hard for them to not put it on a streaming. So I just hope it comes out next month in October so bad. And it's also got a lot of new people to Wes Anderson's acting team. You know, it's got like Timothée Chalamet, it's got Benicio del Toro.
That's the one that I'm kind of excited because he's such a quirky actor. He can turn in very interesting roles.
Totally fits in Wes Anderson movies. Yeah.
And I'm excited for that.
Thanks for watching First of the Best, everyone, on the Anderson Boys.
We drink your cinema. Obviously, if you're a Paul Thomas Anderson fan, you know that reference, you know where it comes from. But yeah, that's just been kind of a special thing for us over the last few years. If we feel like it's really grown on us and grown on our channel, and it was exciting getting to watch that film again recently and kind of hear that within the context of the film.